School bus attacked by grizzly. 12 children mauled. September 18th, 2025. The morning of September 18th, 2025, dawned crisp and clear in the Rattlesnake Valley outside Missoula, Montana, with temperatures hovering at 38 degrees Fahrenheit and a light frost coating the pine needles that stretched endlessly into the Lolo National Forest. Margaret Elizabeth Maggie Thompson, 54 years old, had been driving school bus number 47 for the Missoula County Public School District for 17 years, her weathered hands gripping the oversized steering wheel as she navigated the winding mountain roads that connected the scattered rural homes to Franklin Elementary School in town. Born and raised in these mountains, Maggie knew every curve, every pothole, every place where the asphalt gave way to gravel, and she took pride in delivering her precious cargo of children safely to their destination each morning, regardless of weather conditions that could turn treacherous without warning. The bus, a 2019 International CE series with a maximum capacity of 72 passengers, carried 24 children on this particular morning, ranging in age from 6 to 12 years old, their voices creating a familiar symphony of chatter, laughter, and occasional arguments that Maggie had grown to love over nearly 2 decades behind the wheel. The vehicle stretched 40 feet in length and measured 8 feet in width. Its distinctive yellow paint slightly faded from years of mountain weather, but still bright enough to be visible from considerable distances, equipped with flashing red lights, extendable stop signs, and reinforced steel construction designed to protect its young occupants in the event of collisions or rollover accidents, though no engineer had ever considered the possibility of what would unfold on this September morning. Sarah Elizabeth Jenkins, 9 years old, sat in the third row on the right side of the bus, her sandy blonde hair pulled back in 2 neat braids that her mother, Rebecca Jenkins, had carefully woven that morning while humming softly in their kitchen on Sawmill Creek Road. Sarah, a 4th grader at Franklin Elementary, carried a worn purple backpack containing her math homework, a half-eaten peanut butter sandwich wrapped in aluminum foil, 3 colored pencils, a small notebook filled with drawings of horses, and a photograph of her golden retriever, Buddy, who had died the previous summer after being struck by a logging truck on Highway 200. The little girl possessed an infectious smile and an insatiable curiosity about the natural world around her, often collecting interesting rocks, leaves, and insects during recess to show her teacher, Mrs. Patricia Williams, who encouraged Sarah's budding interest in biology and environmental science. Tyler Matthew Ross, 11 years old and a 6th grader, occupied the seat directly behind Sarah, his unruly brown hair sticking up at odd angles, despite his mother's attempts to tame it with gel that morning. Tyler lived with his parents, David and Jennifer Ross, in a modest 2-story house on Patee Creek Drive, where his father worked as a carpenter for Morrison Construction and his mother served as a part-time nurse at St. Patrick Hospital in Missoula. The boy had inherited his father's mechanical aptitude and spent countless hours in the garage tinkering with small engines, bicycles, and electronic devices, dreaming of someday becoming an automotive engineer like his uncle Marcus, who worked for Ford Motor Company in Detroit. Tyler's backpack contained a disassembled radio that he hoped to repair during lunch, several tools borrowed from his father's workshop, and a science project on renewable energy that was due the following Friday. Emma Grace Kowalski, 8 years old, sat across the aisle from Sarah in seat number 7, her dark hair adorned with small butterfly clips that matched her purple sweater, knitted by her grandmother in Poland and sent as a birthday gift the previous month. Emma's parents, Stanisław and Maria Kowalski, had immigrated to Montana 5 years earlier, seeking work in the expanding tech industry centered around Missoula's growing startup community, where Stanisław now worked as a software developer for a company specializing in forestry management applications. Emma, fluent in both English and Polish, often served as a translator for her younger brother, 4-year-old Jakub, and took pride in maintaining connections to their European heritage while embracing their new American identity. Her backpack contained a Polish-English dictionary, a small wooden doll carved by her grandfather, and homework assignments that she completed with meticulous care, determined to excel academically and make her parents proud. The morning route began at 6:45 a.m., when Maggie started the bus in the district's maintenance facility on South Russell Street, conducting her mandatory pre-trip inspection that included checking tire pressure, testing the brakes, examining the emergency exits, and ensuring that all safety equipment remained in proper working order. The inspection took exactly 18 minutes, a routine she had perfected over years of experience before she pulled out of the facility and began her 47-mile route that would take her deep into the Rattlesnake Wilderness area, where families had built homes on large parcels of land surrounded by thousands of acres of pristine forest habitat that supported diverse wildlife populations, including deer, elk, black bears, and the occasional grizzly bear migrating down from Glacier National Park or the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex. At 7:12 a.m., Maggie made her first stop at the Henderson residence on Sawmill Creek Road, where twin brothers Jake and Luke Henderson, both 10 years old, climbed aboard with their matching red backpacks and identical grins that revealed missing front teeth. The boys, sons of rancher William Henderson and elementary school principal Janet Henderson, had spent the early morning helping their father feed cattle in the pastures that bordered the national forest, where they had noticed fresh bear tracks near the creek that ran through their property, though they thought little of it since bears were common in the area and rarely posed problems for humans who took proper precautions. The second stop came at 7:18 a.m. at the Martinez family's log cabin on Patty Creek Drive, where siblings Isabella Martinez, 12, and her younger brother Carlos, 7, joined the growing group of children. Isabella, a responsible sixth grader who helped her mother run a small catering business specializing in authentic Mexican cuisine, kept a watchful eye on Carlos, who suffered from mild autism and sometimes became overwhelmed by loud noises or sudden changes in routine. Their father, Miguel Martinez, worked as a translator for the federal courthouse in Missoula, while their mother, Carmen, had built a successful business providing meals for weddings, corporate events, and private parties throughout the Missoula area. By 7:35 a.m., the bus had collected all 24 children from 11 different stops scattered across the mountainous terrain, with the final pickup being the Kowalski family residence on a remote dirt road that branched off from the main county highway. As Maggie navigated the narrow, winding roads that led back toward town, she noticed that the wildlife seemed more active than usual, with several deer visible in the meadows and what appeared to be a black bear foraging in a berry patch approximately 200 yards from the road. However, the sighting did not concern her, as bears were commonly observed in the area during September when they engaged in hyperphagia, the intensive feeding period before winter hibernation that could see individual bears consuming up to 20,000 calories per day. The children on the bus represented a cross-section of rural Montana families who had chosen to live in the wilderness areas surrounding Missoula for various reasons, from seeking affordable housing on larger parcels of land to pursuing lifestyles that emphasized outdoor recreation, environmental stewardship, and connection to the natural world. Many of the parents worked in Missoula's diverse economy, which included the University of Montana, St. Patrick Hospital, various government agencies, tourism-related businesses, and a growing technology sector that attracted young professionals from across the United States. The families had chosen to send their children to Franklin Elementary School rather than the smaller rural schools in the area because of its reputation for academic excellence, innovative programs in science and technology, and commitment to individualized education that helped each student reach their full potential. As the bus rounded a sharp curve on Rattlesnake Creek Road at approximately 7:47 a.m., Maggie noticed something unusual in her rearview mirror, a large brown shape moving through the forest parallel to the road, keeping pace with the bus despite its speed of 35 miles per hour. Initially, she assumed it was a moose or elk, both of which were capable of running at such speeds, but as she watched more carefully, she realized the animal's gait and body structure were distinctly ursine. The creature appeared to be an exceptionally large bear, possibly a grizzly based on its size and coloration, though grizzlies were relatively rare in this particular area and typically avoided human contact whenever possible. The bear that would soon change the lives of everyone aboard bus number 47 was a mature male grizzly bear, weighing approximately 640 pounds, measuring 7.5 feet in length and standing 4 feet tall at the shoulder. Wildlife biologists would later identify him as bear number 412, a 22-year-old male that had been captured, tagged and released in Glacier National Park 8 years earlier as part of a comprehensive research program studying grizzly bear behavior, migration patterns, and population dynamics throughout the northern continental divide ecosystem. The bear had been exhibiting increasingly aggressive behavior toward humans over the past 2 years, including several incidents involving property damage, livestock predation, and confrontations with hikers and campers that had resulted in multiple reports to Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks officials. Bear 412's unusual behavior stemmed from a combination of factors that had created a perfect storm of circumstances leading to this tragic morning. Severe drought conditions throughout the summer of 2025 had significantly reduced the availability of natural food sources, including berries, nuts, and fish, forcing bears to travel greater distances in search of adequate nutrition. Climate change had also disrupted traditional migration patterns and seasonal behaviors, with warmer temperatures causing bears to remain active later into the winter months and emerge earlier from hibernation, creating increased competition for limited food resources. Additionally, expanding human development in traditional bear habitat had forced animals like bear 412 to venture closer to populated areas in search of food, leading to dangerous habituation behaviors that made them less fearful of human contact. The specific trigger for bear 412's aggressive behavior on September 18th was hunger combined with the scent of food emanating from the school bus. Several children had brought lunches containing strong-smelling items, including peanut butter sandwiches, fried chicken, and various fruits, while others had spilled juice boxes or dropped snack foods on previous trips, creating a concentration of food odors that proved irresistible to the starving bear. Additionally, the bus's route took it directly through a corridor that bear 412 had been using to travel between feeding areas, and the noise and movement of the vehicle had likely been interpreted as a threat to his territory or a potential source of food. At 7:52 a.m., as the bus approached the steepest section of the mountain road where the pavement narrowed to barely accommodate 2 vehicles, Maggie noticed that the bear had moved closer to the road and appeared to be following the bus with deliberate intent rather than simply moving through the forest in the same direction. She increased her speed slightly, hoping to outdistance the animal, but the bear matched her pace and began moving down the hillside toward the road with obvious purpose. Maggie's 17 years of experience driving in bear country had taught her that most bears would flee when confronted with large, noisy vehicles. But this animal's behavior was unlike anything she had ever witnessed. The children, absorbed in their morning conversations and activities, remained largely unaware of the drama unfolding outside their windows. Sarah Jenkins was reviewing her spelling words for a test scheduled later that morning, quietly mouthing each word to herself as she traced the letters with her finger on the frosty window glass. Tyler Ross had successfully disassembled his radio and was examining the circuit board with a small magnifying glass, trying to identify the faulty component that had caused the device to stop working. Emma Kowalski was teaching her seatmate, 7-year-old Melissa Chen, How to Count to 10 in Polish, both girls giggling at Emma's attempts to help Melissa master the pronunciation of difficult consonant combinations. The Chen family had moved to Montana just 2 years earlier when Dr. James Chen accepted a position as an emergency room physician at St. Patrick Hospital, bringing with him his wife, Dr. Linda Chen, a pediatric oncologist, and their daughter, Melissa, who had quickly adapted to rural mountain life despite having been born and raised in San Francisco. The family lived in a contemporary home they had built on a 40-acre parcel overlooking the Rattlesnake Creek Valley, where they enjoyed hiking, skiing, and wildlife photography while maintaining connections to their urban professional lives through telecommuting and frequent travel for medical conferences. In the back rows of the bus, older students were engaged in more complex conversations about homework assignments, upcoming school events, and the social dynamics that occupied the minds of pre-teenagers navigating the complex world of elementary school relationships. Sixth grader Marcus Washington, 12 years old, was discussing the upcoming basketball season with his friend David Kim, 11, both boys dreaming of making the middle school team the following year and eventually earning scholarships to play at the University of Montana, whose campus they could see in the distance when the bus crested the highest hills on their route. Marcus lived with his grandparents, Robert and Dorothy Washington, on a small ranch where they raised horses and operated a seasonal hunting guide service that catered to out-of-state visitors seeking authentic Montana experiences. His parents had died in a car accident when he was 7 years old, and his grandparents had provided him with a stable, loving home filled with the values of hard work, respect for nature, and dedication to education that would serve him throughout his life. Marcus excelled in both academics and athletics, maintaining a straight A average while competing in track and field, basketball, and rodeo events throughout western Montana. At 7:56 a.m., the situation took a dramatic turn when Bear 412 suddenly accelerated down the hillside and positioned himself directly in the roadway, approximately 100 yards ahead of the bus, standing on his hind legs to his full height of nearly 8 feet and displaying behavior that wildlife experts would later classify as highly aggressive territorial posturing. Maggie immediately applied the brakes and brought the bus to a complete stop, hoping that the bear would lose interest and move away from the road. But instead, the animal dropped to all fours and began approaching the vehicle with a purposeful gait that suggested predatory rather than defensive behavior. The sound of the air brakes engaging and the sudden deceleration caused several children to look up from their activities and peer out the windows, where they were confronted with the sight of the massive grizzly bear walking directly toward their bus with obvious hostile intent. Initial reactions ranged from excitement and wonder to concern and fear, as most of the children had never seen a bear at such close range, and their understanding of wildlife behavior was limited to nature documentaries and classroom presentations that emphasized the rarity of aggressive encounters between bears and humans. "Everyone stay calm and remain in your seats," Maggie announced over the bus's public address system, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins as she assessed the situation and considered her options. Her training had covered various emergency scenarios, including vehicle breakdowns, medical emergencies, and severe weather, but encounters with aggressive wildlife had received only cursory attention, with the assumption that bears would naturally avoid large, noisy vehicles like school buses. Sarah Jenkins pressed her face against the window glass, her spelling words forgotten as she watched the enormous bear approaching with a combination of fascination and growing alarm. "Maggie, why isn't he running away?" she asked in a voice that carried clearly through the bus, causing other children to turn their attention to the unfolding drama outside. Tyler Ross had abandoned his radio repair project and was now kneeling on his seat to get a better view of the bear. his mechanical mind automatically calculating the animal's size, speed, and trajectory relative to the bus's position. Bear 412 approached to within 50 feet of the bus before stopping and standing upright again, swaying slightly from side to side as he tested the air currents for scent information while studying the large yellow vehicle that blocked his path. His behavior indicated high stress levels and frustration, possibly exacerbated by pain from an infected wound on his left shoulder that wildlife biologists would later discover during the necropsy examination. The wound, apparently caused by a collision with a vehicle or confrontation with another bear, had become severely infected and was likely causing significant discomfort that contributed to his aggressive and unpredictable behavior. Maggie reached for the two-way radio mounted on her dashboard and attempted to contact the district's transportation dispatcher to report the situation and request assistance from local wildlife authorities. "Dispatch, this is Bus 47 on Rattlesnake Creek Road with an emergency situation," she spoke into the microphone, but received only static in response, as the mountainous terrain often interfered with radio communications, particularly in the deep valleys, where cell phone coverage was also sporadic at best. She tried several more times to establish contact while keeping her eyes fixed on the bear, which had begun circling the bus in a behavior pattern that suggested increasing agitation and territorial aggression. The children's initial excitement was rapidly giving way to genuine fear as they observed the bear's behavior and sensed the tension in Maggie's voice and body language. Emma Kowalski instinctively reached for Melissa Chen's hand, both girls watching in silence as the massive predator continued his intimidating display. In the middle rows of the bus, the Henderson twins had pressed themselves against the left side windows to get away from the bear, which was now focusing most of his attention on the right side of the vehicle where the door was located. Isabella Martinez, displaying the maturity and responsibility that made her a natural leader among her peers, began quietly reassuring the younger children around her, drawing on lessons she had learned during her family's church youth group about remaining calm during emergencies and trusting in divine protection during times of crisis. Her younger brother Carlos, however, was beginning to show signs of distress related to his autism, rocking back and forth in his seat and making soft humming sounds that indicated he was becoming overwhelmed by the unusual situation and the growing tension among his fellow passengers. At 8:01 a.m., Bear 412 made his first direct contact with the bus by standing on his hind legs and placing his massive front paws against the emergency exit door located at the rear of the vehicle, his claws scraping against the metal surface as he tested the strength and flexibility of potential entry points. The sound of claws against metal created an eerily distinctive screech that sent shivers down the spines of everyone aboard, while the bear's weight caused the entire bus to rock slightly on its suspension, providing a visceral reminder of the animal's incredible size and strength. Maggie made the decision to attempt to drive away from the confrontation by slowly accelerating and trying to maneuver around the bear, but Bear 412 responded by moving to block the road more effectively, positioning himself directly in front of the bus and displaying clear signs of aggression, including lowered head posture, flattened ears, and vocalizations that ranged from deep growls to huffing sounds that indicated high stress and potential attack behavior. The bear's actions demonstrated a level of intelligence and strategic thinking that surprised Maggie, who had assumed that simply starting the engine and moving forward would cause the animal to flee. The noise of the diesel engine revving and the movement of the bus triggered an escalation in Bear 412's aggressive behavior, causing him to rear up to his full height and slam his front paws down on the hood of the vehicle with tremendous force, creating large dents in the metal and causing several children to scream in terror. The impact was powerful enough to activate the bus's emergency flashers and cause the engine to stall, leaving them stranded with the enraged 600-pound predator who had now identified their vehicle as either a threat to be eliminated or a potential source of food to be accessed. Tyler Ross, despite his fear, found himself analyzing the situation from an engineering perspective, noting that the bear had targeted specific areas of the bus that might represent weak points in its construction. "He's trying to find a way inside," Tyler announced to his fellow passengers, his observation causing a wave of panic to sweep through the group as they realized that their yellow metal sanctuary might not provide the protection they had assumed. The bus's construction included reinforced steel panels, shatterproof glass windows, and heavy-duty doors designed to protect passengers during traffic accidents. But these safety features had never been tested against the focused aggression of a large predator, armed with 4-inch claws and powerful jaws, capable of exerting over 1,500 pounds per square inch of bite pressure. The emergency exits, required by federal safety regulations, represented potential weak points that a determined bear might be able to exploit, particularly if the animal's intelligence and problem-solving abilities exceeded normal expectations. As Bear 412 continued his assault on the bus, children began moving away from the windows and huddling together in the center aisle, their natural instincts driving them to seek safety in numbers, while removing themselves from the periphery where the bear's attention was focused. Sarah Jenkins found herself crying quietly, not from terror, but from a deep sadness that the magnificent wild animal she had always admired from a distance was now threatening her and her friends, representing a fundamental disruption of her understanding of the natural world and humanity's place within it. At 8:07 a.m., the situation took a catastrophic turn when Bear 412 discovered that the bus's front passenger door, which operated on an air pressure system, had developed a malfunction that prevented it from closing completely, leaving a gap of approximately 4 inches between the door panels. The bear's acute sense of smell immediately detected the concentrated food odors escaping through this opening, and he began focusing his attention on widening the gap by inserting his claws and applying leverage with his massive strength. Maggie frantically attempted to restart the engine while simultaneously trying to operate the door controls, but the electrical systems had been damaged by the bear's assault on the hood, leaving her with limited options for protecting her passengers. She reached for the emergency radio again and managed to establish contact with a ranger station in the Lolo National Forest, quickly explaining their situation and requesting immediate assistance from law enforcement and wildlife officials. "This is Ranger Station 7. We copy your emergency," came the crackling response through the static. "Large predator attacking school bus on Rattlesnake Creek Road with 24 children aboard. We're dispatching all available units and contacting Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks for specialist support. ETA approximately 20 minutes. Can you maintain your current position?" 20 minutes represented an eternity when facing an enraged grizzly bear, and Maggie knew that their situation was likely to deteriorate long before help could arrive. She could hear the metal door frame beginning to bend under the bear's relentless assault, and she realized that evacuation might be their only option, despite the obvious dangers of exposing the children to direct contact with the aggressive predator. The first indication that Bear 412 might succeed in breaching their defenses came at 8:11 a.m. when his claws managed to catch the rubber seal around the doorframe and tear it away, creating an opening large enough for him to insert his snout and begin the process of forcing the door panels apart. The sight of the bear's massive head appearing in the doorway sent the children into full panic mode, with screaming and crying filling the bus as they pressed themselves against the rear emergency exit in a desperate attempt to escape. Emma Kowalski, drawing on her family's Catholic faith and the prayers her grandmother had taught her in Poland, began reciting the Lord's Prayer in both English and Polish, her clear voice somehow audible above the chaos and providing a measure of comfort to the terrified children around her. Other students joined in with whatever prayers or comforting words they could remember from their various religious and cultural backgrounds, creating a multicultural chorus of hope and desperation that would haunt the memories of survivors for years to come. Isabella Martinez took charge of the younger children, organizing them into a tight group near the rear of the bus, while instructing them to remain calm and follow her directions, drawing on leadership skills she had developed through her involvement in student government and volunteer work with her mother's catering business. Her brother Carlos, overwhelmed by the chaos and unfamiliar with the protocol for such emergencies, had begun having what appeared to be a mild seizure, his body trembling uncontrollably as his neurological system responded to the extreme stress of the situation. At 8:14 a.m., Bear 412 succeeded in forcing the front door open wide enough to insert his massive head and shoulders into the bus, his presence filling the front section of the vehicle and creating a scene of absolute terror as 24 children found themselves trapped in a confined space with one of North America's most dangerous predators. The Bear's entry into the bus marked the beginning of the most traumatic 12 minutes in the history of Missoula County's school transportation system, as the animal began a systematic exploration of his new environment while searching for the food sources his keen sense of smell had detected. Maggie Thompson, displaying the courage and quick thinking that had made her a beloved figure in the rural school community, grabbed the emergency fire extinguisher from its mounting bracket and positioned herself between the Bear and the children, despite knowing that such a weapon would provide minimal protection against a 600-pound predator. Her actions bought precious seconds for the students to organize themselves and move toward the rear emergency exit, though opening that exit would expose them to the possibility of being chased and attacked in the open forest, where the Bear's speed and agility would give him significant advantages. The Bear's behavior inside the bus was initially exploratory rather than immediately aggressive, as he sniffed the air and investigated various seats where food odors were strongest. But his massive size meant that his movements caused significant damage to the interior and created additional panic among the children who found themselves in impossibly close proximity to the wild predator. His claws scraped against the metal floor, creating a shower of sparks, while his weight caused seats to bend and break as he moved through the confined space. Sarah Jenkins, trapped in her third-row seat by the Bear's position in the aisle, made a decision that would later be praised by child psychologists as remarkably mature and selfless. Rather than screaming or attempting to flee, she remained motionless and began speaking to the Bear in a soft, calm voice, using techniques she had observed during nature documentaries about wildlife behavior and animal communication. "It's okay, big guy," she whispered, her voice somehow carrying through the chaos. "We're not going to hurt you. You're just hungry, aren't you?" The Bear's attention was drawn to Sarah's voice and movement, and he approached her seat with curiosity rather than obvious aggression, though his massive presence, less than 3 feet away from the 9-year-old girl, created a scene of almost unbearable tension for everyone watching. Sarah's backpack, containing her half-eaten peanut butter sandwich, was located directly beneath her seat, and the Bear's acute sense of smell had identified this as a primary source of the food odors that had attracted him to the bus. Tyler Ross, positioned directly behind Sarah, found himself in an equally precarious situation as the Bear's hindquarters blocked the aisle and prevented any possibility of escape toward the rear of the bus. His mechanical mind continued to analyze the situation, noting that the Bear seemed focused on specific locations rather than showing random aggressive behavior, suggesting that food sources were the primary motivation rather than territorial aggression or defensive behavior triggered by perceived threats. At 8:17 a.m., the situation escalated dramatically when Bear 412 attempted to access Sarah's backpack by reaching under her seat with his massive front paw, inadvertently striking her leg with his claws and causing the first of what would eventually be 12 separate injury incidents during the attack. Sarah's scream of pain and terror seemed to trigger a change in the bear's behavior, as if the sound activated predatory instincts that had been dormant during his initial exploration of the vehicle. The scratch wounds on Sarah's left leg, while not immediately life-threatening, were deep enough to draw blood and cause significant pain, leading to the 9-year-old going into shock as her body's natural response to trauma and fear overwhelmed her system. The scent of blood in the confined space of the bus seemed to further agitate Bear 412, whose behavior became more aggressive and unpredictable as his predatory instincts were fully activated by the presence of an injured potential prey animal. Maggie Thompson made the heroic decision to discharge the fire extinguisher directly into the bear's face, creating a cloud of chemical foam that temporarily confused and irritated the animal, while providing a momentary distraction that allowed several children to move toward the rear exit. However, the bear's response to this attack was immediate and violent, as he reared up to his full height within the confines of the bus and swept his front paws in wide arcs that connected with several students who had been unable to move out of range quickly enough. Tyler Ross bore the brunt of the bear's retaliatory strike, receiving deep claw wounds across his back and shoulders as he attempted to shield Sarah from further injury. The 11-year-old boy's courage in placing himself between the bear and the younger girl would later earn him recognition from the Montana State Police and various civic organizations. But in the moment, his screams of pain added to the chaos and terror that filled every corner of the school bus. Emma Kowalski, positioned across the aisle from Sarah and Tyler, was struck by the bear's left paw as he turned to investigate the source of the chemical irritation from the fire extinguisher, receiving facial lacerations and a concussion that left her temporarily unconscious and bleeding profusely from wounds that would require extensive plastic surgery to repair. The sight of the 8-year-old girl's injuries sent several other children into hysterics, creating a cacophony of screaming and crying that seemed to further agitate the already stressed and confused predator. The Henderson twins, Jake and Luke, had managed to reach the rear emergency exit and were attempting to open the heavy door, while Isabella Martinez continued to organize the evacuation of younger children. But the exit mechanism required adult strength and coordination that proved beyond their capabilities under the extreme stress of the situation. Their efforts were further complicated by the fact that opening the exit would trigger an alarm system that would create additional noise and confusion while potentially attracting the bear's attention to their location. Marcus Washington, displaying the leadership qualities that had made him captain of his youth basketball team, took charge of the rear evacuation effort, while Isabella focused on keeping the younger children calm and organized. His experience working with horses on his grandparents' ranch had taught him to remain calm around large, powerful animals, and he applied these skills to the current crisis by speaking in low, soothing tones while methodically working to open the emergency exit. At 8:19 a.m., Bear 412's attention was drawn to the rear of the bus by the noise of the children's evacuation efforts, and he began moving in that direction, his massive body filling the aisle and trapping several students in their seats as he passed. Melissa Chen, the 7-year-old daughter of the emergency room physician, found herself directly in the bear's path and received severe injuries to her left arm and shoulder when she was unable to move out of the way quickly enough. The injuries to Melissa Chen were among the most serious sustained during the attack, as the bear's claws penetrated deeply into her shoulder joint and caused significant damage to muscles, tendons, and blood vessels that would require multiple surgeries and months of rehabilitation to repair. Her screams of pain and terror echoed through the bus and could be heard by responding emergency personnel who were still several miles away, but approaching rapidly with sirens wailing through the mountain forests. Dr. James Chen, working his shift in the emergency room at St. Patrick Hospital, had no knowledge of the unfolding tragedy that would soon bring his critically injured daughter into his trauma bay, where he would face the ultimate test of his professional training and emotional strength as he worked to save the life of his own child while maintaining the clinical objectivity required for effective medical treatment. The bear's movement toward the rear of the bus created a momentary opportunity for Maggie Thompson to escape through the damaged front door, but her sense of responsibility for the children under her care prevented her from abandoning them to save herself. Instead, she grabbed a heavy flashlight from the driver's area and began striking the bear on his hindquarters and back legs, hoping to distract him from the children and draw his aggression toward herself as an adult who might have a better chance of surviving a direct confrontation. Maggie's sacrifice succeeded in attracting Bear 412's attention, and he turned to face her with obvious aggressive intent, rearing up to his full height and displaying the intimidation behaviors that grizzly bears use to establish dominance over perceived threats. The 54-year-old bus driver, standing barely 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing less than 140 pounds, faced the 600-pound predator with remarkable courage, knowing that her actions might cost her life but could potentially save the lives of the 24 children trapped behind the bear. The confrontation between Maggie and Bear 412 lasted approximately 45 seconds, and resulted in the most severe injuries sustained during the entire incident, as the bear's attack on the adult human triggered full predatory behavior that included biting, clawing, and attempts to drag his victim away from the perceived threat posed by the other humans in the confined space. Maggie's injuries included deep puncture wounds from the bear's canine teeth, severe lacerations from his claws, and crushing injuries from his powerful bite that caused multiple fractures to her ribs, left arm, and collarbone. The sight of their beloved bus driver being savagely attacked by the massive predator galvanized the older children into action, with Marcus Washington and Isabella Martinez working together to finally open the rear emergency exit while directing the younger students to begin evacuating the bus, despite the obvious dangers of exposing themselves to potential pursuit by the bear or becoming lost in the dense forest that surrounded the remote mountain road. At 8:22 a.m., as emergency responders were still 8 minutes away from the scene, the first group of children successfully exited the bus through the rear emergency door and began running into the forest, their instincts driving them to seek cover among the trees, despite having no clear plan for what to do once they had escaped the immediate danger. The evacuation was hampered by the fact that several children, including Sarah Jenkins, Tyler Ross, and Emma Kowalski, were too severely injured to move under their own power, while others were too young or frightened to follow instructions effectively. Isabella Martinez made the difficult decision to remain on the bus with her injured brother Carlos and several other children who could not be safely moved, while Marcus Washington led a group of mobile students into the forest where they would await rescue while hiding in a dense grove of pine trees approximately 100 yards from the road. The division of the group was necessary for the survival of all, but it meant that the remaining children on the bus continued to face mortal danger from the increasingly agitated bear. Bear 412's successful attack on Maggie Thompson seemed to satisfy some of his aggressive impulses, and his behavior became slightly less frenzied as he began investigating the food sources that had originally attracted him to the bus, including Sarah's peanut butter sandwich, various snack foods that had been dropped or abandoned during the chaos, and juice boxes that had been punctured and were leaking their contents onto the floor. However, the presence of injured and bleeding humans in the confined space continued to trigger predatory responses that made him unpredictable and extremely dangerous. The 7 children who remained on the bus after the partial evacuation included some of the most severely injured victims, as well as those who were too young or frightened to attempt escape into the wilderness. Isabella Martinez, displaying maturity and leadership far beyond her 12 years, organized the survivors into a tight group at the very rear of the bus, while using torn pieces of clothing and first aid supplies from the driver's emergency kit to provide basic medical care for the wounded. Sarah Jenkins, despite her own injuries and traumatic shock, continued to speak softly to the bear in an attempt to maintain the brief moments of calm behavior she had observed earlier, demonstrating a remarkable understanding of animal psychology that may have prevented additional attacks during the final minutes before emergency responders arrived on the scene. Her whispered words and non-threatening posture seemed to have a moderately calming effect on Bear 412, whose attention was increasingly focused on consuming the food items he had located rather than pursuing additional aggressive interactions with the human occupants. The first emergency responders to reach the scene were Montana State Police Trooper Daniel McKenzie and Missoula County Sheriff's Deputy Maria Gonzalez, who arrived at 8:30 a.m. to find school bus number 47 rocking on its suspension as the massive grizzly bear continued to move around inside, while a group of injured children huddled at the rear of the vehicle. The officers immediately radioed for additional support, including wildlife specialists, paramedics, and helicopter evacuation services, while establishing a perimeter around the bus to prevent the bear from escaping into the surrounding forest, where he might pose additional threats to search and rescue personnel. Trooper McKenzie, a 20-year veteran of law enforcement with extensive training in wildlife encounters, faced an unprecedented situation that required balancing the immediate need to protect the children with the longer-term goal of safely removing the bear without causing further injuries or fatalities. His initial assessment indicated that direct confrontation with the animal could provoke additional aggressive behavior that might prove fatal for the remaining victims, while passive observation might allow the bear to cause additional injuries or prevent medical personnel from accessing critically wounded children who required immediate emergency treatment. The sound of approaching sirens and the arrival of multiple emergency vehicles seemed to agitate Bear 412, who moved toward the damaged front door of the bus and began displaying territorial behaviors that suggested he perceived the area as his domain and the approaching humans as threats to be repelled. This behavioral change created a window of opportunity for the rescue of remaining children, but it also increased the danger to emergency responders who would need to approach the vehicle to provide medical assistance. At 8:35 a.m., Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks bear specialist Dr. Jennifer Harrison arrived on scene with specialized equipment for dealing with aggressive wildlife, including tranquilizer darts, noise-making devices, and protective gear that would allow a close approach to the dangerous predator. Dr. Harrison, who had dealt with over 200 bear encounters during her 15-year career, immediately recognized that Bear 412's behavior indicated a combination of factors including hunger, stress, possible injury or illness, and territorial aggression that made him extremely unpredictable and dangerous. The decision-making process for dealing with the situation involved multiple agencies and competing priorities, as the immediate need to rescue injured children had to be balanced against the longer-term goal of preserving both human life and wildlife conservation objectives. Dr. Harrison's initial assessment indicated that tranquilization would be the preferred method for subduing the bear, but the confined space of the school bus and the presence of injured children complicated the logistics of safely administering sedatives without causing additional trauma or injuries. Meanwhile, inside the bus, Isabella Martinez continued to coordinate basic medical care for the wounded while maintaining communication with emergency responders through hand signals visible through the rear window. Her brother Carlos had stabilized somewhat after his initial seizure-like response to the trauma, but he remained in a state of shock that required careful monitoring and professional medical attention as soon as the situation could be safely resolved. Sarah Jenkins, whose injuries were bleeding steadily and causing increasing weakness from blood loss, maintained her quiet communication with Bear 412 despite her deteriorating condition, demonstrating a level of courage and selflessness that would inspire emergency responders, medical personnel, and the broader community for years to come. Her whispered words seemed to provide some measure of calm for both the Bear and her fellow passengers during the most terrifying moments of their young lives. Tyler Ross, whose back and shoulder injuries were among the most severe sustained during the attack, had lost consciousness due to blood loss and trauma, but continued to breathe steadily, indicating that his vital organs had not been compromised by the deep claw wounds that would require extensive surgical repair and months of physical therapy. His position near Sarah allowed Isabella to provide basic first aid for both children while keeping them as comfortable as possible under the circumstances. At 8:41 a.m., Dr. Harrison made the decision to attempt tranquilization of Bear 412 using a dart gun loaded with a combination of sedatives calculated to subdue a 600-pound animal without causing permanent harm or death, though the confined space of the bus and the stress of the situation made accurate dosing extremely difficult. Her first shot, fired through the damaged front door of the bus, struck the Bear in the left shoulder and delivered the sedative payload, but the animal's size and adrenaline levels meant that several minutes would be required before the drugs took effect. The period between tranquilization and unconsciousness represented the most dangerous phase of the rescue operation, as wounded animals often exhibited increased aggression and unpredictable behavior when affected by sedative drugs. Bear 412's initial response to the dart was to rear up and roar with a sound that could be heard over a mile away, followed by increasingly erratic movement around the bus that caused additional damage to the interior and created serious risks for the remaining children. Emergency medical technician Rachel Thompson, who happened to share a surname with bus driver Maggie Thompson, though they were not related, positioned herself near the rear emergency exit with medical equipment and stretchers needed to evacuate the most critically injured children as soon as the Bear could be safely removed from the vehicle. Her assessment of visible injuries indicated that multiple victims would require immediate helicopter transport to trauma centers in Missoula, while others could be treated at local medical facilities or released after examination and basic wound care. At 8:47 a.m., Bear 412 finally succumbed to the tranquilizer drugs and collapsed in the center aisle of the bus, his massive body creating an obstacle that complicated the evacuation of injured children, but finally ending the immediate threat that had terrorized 24 young passengers for nearly an hour. The Bear's unconscious state would last approximately 2 hours, providing ample time for rescue operations while ensuring that he could not cause additional injuries or interfere with medical treatment of the victims. The evacuation of children from the bus began immediately after confirmation that Bear 412 was fully unconscious, with medical personnel working in teams to carefully remove the most critically injured victims first, while documenting their injuries and beginning emergency treatment procedures. Sarah Jenkins was among the first to be evacuated due to her severe blood loss and deteriorating vital signs, followed closely by Tyler Ross, whose back injuries required careful handling to prevent potential spinal cord damage. Emma Kowalski's facial injuries and concussion symptoms indicated possible brain trauma that required immediate evaluation by neurosurgery specialists, making her a priority for helicopter evacuation to the trauma center at St. Patrick Hospital, where her parents, Dr. Stanisław Kowalski and Maria Kowalski, were already being notified of the incident and preparing to rush to the hospital to be with their critically injured daughter. The medical triage process was complicated by the fact that several children had sustained injuries that were not immediately apparent, including internal injuries from the bear's powerful blows, psychological trauma that would require ongoing mental health support, and contamination of wounds from the bear's claws and teeth that created serious infection risks, requiring prophylactic antibiotic treatment and careful monitoring for signs of sepsis or other complications. Melissa Chen's shoulder injuries were among the most complex to treat, as the bear's claws had penetrated deeply into the joint capsule and caused damage to multiple anatomical structures that would require surgical repair by orthopedic specialists. Her father, Dr. James Chen, received notification of his daughter's injuries while treating other patients in the emergency room and faced the agonizing decision of whether to participate directly in her medical care or step aside to allow colleagues to provide treatment while he supported her as a parent rather than a physician. The children, who had successfully evacuated the bus during the attack, were located by search and rescue teams in the Pine Grove, where Marcus Washington had led them to safety, all suffering from exposure, dehydration, and varying degrees of psychological trauma, but without serious physical injuries that required immediate medical intervention. Their survival was attributed to Marcus's leadership and the basic wilderness survival skills he had learned during his upbringing on his grandparents' ranch. Bus driver Maggie Thompson, who had sustained the most severe injuries during the attack, was airlifted to the trauma center in critical condition with multiple life-threatening wounds that required immediate surgical intervention. Her heroic actions in protecting the children under her care had undoubtedly saved lives, but at tremendous personal cost that would require months of hospitalization and rehabilitation, even if she survived the initial trauma surgery. At 9:15 a.m., the last of the injured children had been evacuated from bus number 47, leaving behind a scene of destruction that would be preserved as evidence for the subsequent investigation into the incident and the factors that had contributed to Bear 412's unusual aggressive behavior. The bus's interior was covered in blood, damaged seats, scattered personal belongings, and claw marks that provided a stark reminder of the violence that had occurred during the 40-minute ordeal. Bear 412 remained unconscious under the supervision of Dr. Harrison and a team of wildlife specialists who were preparing to transport him to a secure facility where he could be examined, treated for any injuries or illnesses that might have contributed to his aggressive behavior, and evaluated for potential relocation to a more remote area of Montana, where he would pose less risk to human populations. However, the severity of the incident and the bear's history of problematic behavior made euthanization a likely outcome despite conservation concerns. The immediate aftermath of the attack saw a massive response from multiple agencies, including Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, the Montana State Police, Missoula County Sheriff's Department, United States Forest Service, emergency medical services, and local volunteer organizations that provided support services for affected families. The coordination of these various agencies required establishment of an incident command center and implementation of emergency protocols that had been developed for natural disasters and terrorist attacks, but had never been tested in response to a wildlife attack of this magnitude. Media coverage of the incident began within hours of the attack, with local television stations providing live coverage from the scene, while national news outlets picked up the story and began broadcasting reports about the unprecedented grizzly bear attack on a school bus filled with elementary school children. The coverage raised important questions about wildlife management policies, school transportation safety in rural areas, and the increasing frequency of human-wildlife conflicts in regions where development had encroached on traditional animal habitats. Dr. Patricia Williams, the fourth-grade teacher at Franklin Elementary School, who had encouraged Sarah Jenkins' interest in biology and environmental science, arrived at St. Patrick Hospital, along with other faculty members, to provide support for affected families and to begin planning for the psychological counseling and academic accommodations that would be needed for students returning to school after such a traumatic experience. The school district had protocols for dealing with various emergency situations, but nothing in their planning had anticipated an incident of this nature and severity. The first press conference regarding the incident was held at 2 p.m. on September 18th, with Missoula County Sheriff David Rodriguez providing basic information about the attack, while emphasizing that the investigation was ongoing and that the privacy of affected families would be respected during the recovery process. Sheriff Rodriguez praised the courage of bus driver Maggie Thompson and student leader Isabella Martinez, while acknowledging that the full extent of physical and psychological injuries might not be known for weeks or months as children underwent medical treatment and evaluation. At St. Patrick Hospital, Dr. James Chen had made the difficult decision to allow his colleagues to treat his daughter Melissa while he focused on coordinating the overall medical response to the incident, drawing on his extensive experience with mass casualty events to ensure that all victims received appropriate prioritization and care. The hospital's trauma team had been reinforced with specialists from other medical centers, and multiple operating rooms had been prepared to handle the complex surgical procedures required for several of the injured children. Sarah Jenkins underwent 3 hours of surgery to repair the deep claw wounds on her leg and to address internal injuries that had been discovered during her medical evaluation, with vascular surgeons working to restore blood flow to damaged tissues, while plastic surgeons began the process of minimizing scarring that could affect her mobility and appearance throughout her life. Her parents, Rebecca and Michael Jenkins, maintained a bedside vigil while communicating with other affected families and beginning to grapple with the reality of their daughter's traumatic experience. Tyler Ross's surgical procedure focused on repairing the extensive damage to his back and shoulders while carefully preserving nerve function that could affect his long-term mobility and strength, with orthopedic surgeons spending over 4 hours reconstructing damaged muscle tissue and reattaching severed tendons. His mechanical aptitude and dreams of becoming an automotive engineer now seemed secondary to the immediate challenges of recovery and rehabilitation that would dominate his life for the foreseeable future. Emma Kowalski's facial injuries required the expertise of both plastic surgeons and neurosurgeons, as the bear's claws had come dangerously close to her eyes and had caused fractures to her skull that needed immediate repair to prevent complications such as brain swelling or infection. Her parents, Stanisław and Maria Kowalski, faced the additional challenge of coordinating her medical care while dealing with language barriers and cultural differences that complicated their understanding of American medical procedures and legal processes. The psychological trauma counseling for affected children began immediately, with crisis counselors from the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services working alongside child psychologists from the University of Montana to provide both individual and group therapy sessions designed to help victims process their experiences and begin the healing process. The counselors emphasized that recovery from such severe trauma would likely require months or years of ongoing support, and that some children might experience long-term psychological effects, including post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, and phobias related to wildlife or confined spaces. Isabella Martinez, despite her own traumatic experience, emerged as a natural leader among the survivors and began organizing informal support groups for her fellow students while working with counselors to develop coping strategies and communication techniques that would help the group maintain connections during their recovery period. Her maturity and resilience provided inspiration for both parents and medical professionals while demonstrating the remarkable capacity of children to support each other during times of crisis. Marcus Washington's leadership during the evacuation had saved the lives of several children, but he struggled with feelings of guilt about leaving others behind on the bus, a common psychological response among survivors of traumatic events who question whether they could have done more to help others. Counselors worked with him to understand that his decision to lead capable children to safety had been correct, and that attempting to remain on the bus would likely have resulted in additional casualties rather than fewer injuries overall. The investigation into the incident was led by Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, in cooperation with federal agencies and academic researchers who sought to understand the complex factors that had contributed to Bear 412's unprecedented aggressive behavior toward a school bus filled with children. Preliminary findings indicated that the bear had been suffering from an infected wound, malnutrition due to drought conditions, and possible neurological damage from a previous vehicle strike, creating a combination of factors that had eliminated his natural fear of humans and triggered predatory behavior toward perceived food sources. Dr. Jennifer Harrison's comprehensive report on the incident documented the various warning signs that had preceded the attack, including increased bear activity in the area, reports of property damage and livestock predation, and previous encounters with humans that had demonstrated the animal's lack of appropriate fear responses. The report raised important questions about the effectiveness of current wildlife management strategies and the need for improved communication between agencies responsible for monitoring dangerous wildlife and those responsible for public safety. The necropsy examination of Bear 412, who was euthanized 2 days after the attack due to the severity of his behavioral problems and the public safety risk he represented, revealed evidence of chronic pain and stress that had likely contributed to his aggressive behavior, as well as significant malnutrition that indicated the broader environmental challenges facing grizzly bear populations throughout the northern continental divide ecosystem. The findings supported arguments for increased funding for wildlife research and habitat preservation, while also highlighting the need for better strategies to manage human-wildlife conflicts in areas where development continued to encroach on traditional bear habitat. The legal proceedings related to the incident began with wrongful injury lawsuits filed on behalf of several families against the Missoula County School District, claiming that inadequate safety protocols and poor emergency preparedness had contributed to the severity of injuries sustained by the children. The school district's legal team argued that the attack represented an unprecedented situation that could not have been reasonably anticipated or prevented, while plaintiffs' attorneys contended that the district should have implemented better wildlife awareness training and emergency communication systems for drivers operating in known bear habitat. Additional legal action was taken against Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks by families who argued that the agency had failed to adequately monitor and manage a known dangerous animal, citing previous reports of Bear 412's aggressive behavior and property damage that should have triggered removal or relocation procedures before the animal posed a threat to human life. The agency's defense focused on the challenges of managing wildlife populations across millions of acres of habitat while balancing conservation objectives with public safety concerns and limited resources for monitoring individual animals. The insurance implications of the incident created complex legal and financial challenges for multiple parties, including the school district's liability coverage, the family's health insurance providers, and workers' compensation claims related to Maggie Thompson's injuries sustained in the line of duty. The unprecedented nature of the attack meant that many standard insurance policies did not clearly address coverage for wildlife-related injuries, leading to lengthy legal proceedings to determine financial responsibility for medical expenses, rehabilitation costs, and long-term care needs. Media attention to the story continued for several months after the initial attack, with follow-up stories tracking the recovery progress of injured children, examining the broader implications for wildlife management policy, and profiling the heroic actions of individuals who had risked their lives to protect others during the crisis. National Geographic, Discovery Channel, and various documentary filmmakers expressed interest in producing comprehensive examinations of the incident, though most families declined to participate in media projects while focusing on their children's recovery and privacy needs. The community response to the incident demonstrated the close-knit nature of rural Montana society, with neighbors, churches, businesses, and civic organizations organizing fundraising events, meal preparation services, and other support activities for affected families. The Missoula Community Foundation established a special fund to assist with medical expenses and long-term care needs that exceeded insurance coverage, while local businesses donated goods and services to help families cope with the financial impact of extended hospital stays and rehabilitation programs. Educational initiatives stemming from the incident included development of new wildlife awareness curricula for Montana schools, enhanced emergency preparedness training for school transportation personnel, and research projects examining the effectiveness of various bear deterrent technologies and communication systems that might prevent similar incidents in the future. The University of Montana's Wildlife Biology program incorporated the case study into their coursework as an example of the complex interactions between human development, wildlife behavior, and public safety concerns. Recovery progress for the injured children varied significantly based on the severity of their physical and psychological trauma, with some students able to return to school within weeks, while others required months of hospitalization, multiple surgical procedures, and ongoing rehabilitation services. Sarah Jenkins, whose quiet courage during the attack had potentially saved lives, faced a particularly challenging recovery due to nerve damage in her leg that affected her mobility and required extensive physical therapy to regain normal function. Tyler Ross's mechanical aptitude proved beneficial during his recovery, as he approached his physical therapy with the same analytical mindset he applied to repairing engines and electronic devices, carefully studying the anatomical systems involved in his injuries and working methodically to rebuild strength and mobility in his damaged back and shoulders. His determination to return to his engineering interests provided motivation during the most difficult phases of rehabilitation. Emma Kowalski's facial reconstruction required multiple surgical procedures over the course of 18 months, with plastic surgeons working to minimize scarring while preserving her vision and normal facial function. Her family's strong Catholic faith and support from their Polish-American community provided emotional strength during the challenging recovery process, while her natural resilience and positive attitude inspired medical personnel and fellow patients throughout her treatment. Melissa Chen's shoulder injuries proved to be among the most complex to treat, requiring innovative surgical techniques and collaboration between multiple specialists to restore function to the damaged joint while minimizing long-term disability that could affect her participation in sports and other physical activities. Her father's medical background provided both advantages and challenges during her treatment, as his professional knowledge helped him understand the complexity of her injuries, while also making it difficult to maintain the emotional distance needed to cope with his daughter's trauma. Bus driver Maggie Thompson faced the longest and most difficult recovery process, spending 4 months in the hospital followed by extensive rehabilitation for her multiple injuries, including permanent nerve damage that ended her career in school transportation and required adaptation to significant physical limitations. However, her heroic actions during the attack earned her widespread recognition and support from the community, including establishment of a scholarship fund in her name to assist students pursuing careers in education and public service. The psychological impact of the incident extended beyond the immediate victims to include family members, emergency responders, medical personnel, and community members who were traumatized by the violence and suffering they witnessed or heard about through media coverage. Mental health services in the Missoula area were expanded to address the broader community impact, with particular attention to preventing secondary trauma among individuals whose professional or personal relationships connected them to the affected families. Isabella Martinez's leadership during and after the attack earned her recognition from various organizations, including the Montana State Police, the American Red Cross, and several youth leadership programs. But she consistently emphasized that her actions had simply reflected the values of service and responsibility that her parents had instilled in her through their family's commitment to community service and mutual support. Her brother, Carlos's recovery from his autism-related trauma response required specialized therapeutic interventions and family support services that helped him process the experience and develop coping strategies for managing stress and anxiety in the future. The long-term impact of the incident on Franklin Elementary School included implementation of enhanced safety protocols, trauma-informed educational practices, and ongoing mental health support services for students, faculty, and families affected by the attack. The school's approach to addressing the aftermath became a model for other educational institutions dealing with traumatic events, emphasizing the importance of maintaining normal routines while providing appropriate support for individuals with varying recovery needs. Marcus Washington's role in saving several children during the evacuation earned him scholarship opportunities and recognition from youth leadership organizations. But he remained focused on his original goals of academic excellence and athletic achievement while using his experience to mentor other young people facing difficult circumstances. His grandparents' ranch became a gathering place for survivors and their families, providing a peaceful environment where they could maintain connections and support each other's ongoing recovery efforts. The incident prompted legislative initiatives in Montana and other states aimed at improving wildlife management funding, enhancing emergency preparedness requirements for schools in rural areas, and developing better communication systems for coordinating responses to unusual emergency situations involving both human safety and wildlife conservation concerns. These policy changes reflected the recognition that traditional approaches to managing human-wildlife conflicts needed to be updated to address the increasing frequency and complexity of such incidents in areas where development continued to expand into wildlife habitat. Research initiatives stemming from the attack included comprehensive studies of grizzly bear behavior, analysis of factors contributing to wildlife aggression toward humans, and development of new technologies for monitoring and deterring dangerous animals in areas where they might encounter human populations. The findings from these studies contributed to improved understanding of wildlife biology and behavior while informing policy decisions about habitat management, development planning, and public safety protocols in bear country. The anniversary of the September 18th attack became an annual occasion for remembering the victims, honoring the heroes who had risked their lives to protect others, and raising awareness about wildlife conservation and safety issues that affected rural communities throughout the American West. Memorial services, educational programs, and fundraising events held on this date helped maintain public attention to these important issues while providing opportunities for survivors and their families to connect with supportive community members and continue their healing processes. 5 years after the attack, most of the injured children had achieved significant recovery from their physical injuries, though some continued to deal with ongoing medical issues, psychological trauma, and life changes resulting from their experiences on bus number 47. Sarah Jenkins had regained most of the function in her injured leg and maintained her interest in biology and environmental science, though she now focused on research that might help prevent similar incidents through better understanding of wildlife behavior and human-animal interactions. Tyler Ross had successfully pursued his mechanical interests despite limitations from his back and shoulder injuries, adapting his approach to engineering projects while developing new insights into ergonomic design and accessibility issues that affected individuals with physical disabilities. His experience during the attack had reinforced his determination to create technology that could help protect people in dangerous situations, leading to innovative work in emergency communication systems and safety equipment design. Emma Kowalski's facial reconstruction had been largely successful, though subtle scarring remained as a permanent reminder of her traumatic experience, and she had channeled her recovery journey into advocacy work for trauma survivors and support for other children facing medical challenges. Her bilingual abilities and cultural background made her particularly effective in working with immigrant families dealing with emergency medical situations and navigating complex healthcare systems. The families affected by the attack had formed lasting bonds that continued to provide mutual support and advocacy for improved wildlife management, school safety, and trauma recovery services throughout Montana and the broader region. Their collective voice had become influential in policy discussions and legislative initiatives aimed at preventing similar incidents, while preserving the natural heritage and outdoor lifestyle that had drawn them to rural Montana in the first place. The story of school bus number 47 and the grizzly bear attack of September 18, 2025, became a case study in crisis response, community resilience, and the complex relationships between human development and wildlife conservation in the modern American West, serving as both a tragic reminder of nature's power and an inspiring example of human courage, compassion, and determination in the face of unimaginable adversity. The next stories: Grizzly Mauls, 3 police officers outside station, April 22, 2024. The morning of April 22, 2024 began like any other in Bozeman, Montana, with the pre-dawn darkness slowly giving way to the pale light of spring. At 4:47 a.m., Officer Mark Hill pulled his patrol cruiser into the vehicle bay of the Bozeman Police Department, the familiar rumble of the Crown Victoria's engine echoing off the concrete walls. At 38 years old, Hill had been with the department for 14 years, long enough to know that the quiet moments before sunrise often held the most unpredictable dangers. His weathered hands gripped the steering wheel as he sat for a moment, watching the steam rise from his coffee cup in the cup holder beside him. Mark Hill had grown up in the shadow of the Bridger Mountains, born to parents who had moved to Montana in the late 1970s, seeking escape from the urban sprawl of Denver. His father, Robert Hill, had worked as a forest ranger for 32 years before retiring, instilling in young Mark a deep respect for the wilderness that surrounded their community. His mother, Patricia, had taught elementary school at Hawthorne Elementary for 27 years, retiring just 2 years prior. Mark's childhood had been filled with camping trips, hunting expeditions, and countless hours learning about the delicate balance between human civilization and the untamed wilderness that pressed against the edges of Bozeman's expanding borders. He had two younger sisters, Sarah, who worked as a veterinarian in Billings, and Jennifer, who had moved to Seattle to work in tech, but visited every Christmas with her husband and two young children. Mark had married his high school sweetheart, Amanda, when he was 22, and they had built a life together in a modest two-story home on the north side of town. Their marriage had weathered its share of storms, including Amanda's battle with breast cancer 3 years earlier, which had ended successfully but left both of them changed. They had tried for children for years before accepting that it wasn't meant to be, instead pouring their parental energy into mentoring teenagers through their church youth group. Mark's partner on the force, Detective Ray Morrison, often joked that Mark treated every rookie cop like the son he never had, spending extra time on training and always being available for advice or guidance. As he stepped out of his cruiser that morning, Mark's boots echoed against the polished concrete floor of the vehicle bay. The space was designed to accommodate 8 patrol vehicles, with hydraulic lifts for maintenance work and tool cabinets lining the walls. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows between the vehicles. The bay doors, each measuring 12 feet wide by 10 feet high, were constructed of reinforced steel and aluminum, designed to withstand the harsh Montana winters and provide security for the valuable police equipment housed inside. The eastern bay door, closest to where Mark had parked, had been acting up for weeks, the electronic mechanism occasionally failing to engage properly, leaving a gap of several inches at the bottom that the maintenance crew kept promising to fix. At 5:12 a.m., Officer Teresa Nguyen arrived for her shift, her compact Honda Civic sliding into the space next to Mark's cruiser. At 29, Teresa was one of the department's rising stars, having joined the force just 4 years earlier after completing a degree in criminal justice at Montana State University. Born in Sacramento to Vietnamese immigrants who had arrived in America in 1982, Teresa had grown up straddling two cultures, speaking Vietnamese at home while excelling in American schools. Her parents, Duc and Lynn Nguyen, had opened a small restaurant called Golden Lotus on Main Street, which had become a beloved fixture in the community over the past 20 years. Teresa's path to law enforcement had been unconventional. Initially, she had planned to become a teacher like her aunt, earning a degree in education and working for 2 years at a middle school in Missoula. However, a domestic violence incident she had witnessed as a young teacher had changed her perspective entirely. She had watched helplessly as one of her students, a bright 13-year-old girl named Amy, had gradually withdrawn from class activities and shown up with suspicious bruises that she explained away with increasingly elaborate stories about clumsiness. When Teresa finally reported her concerns to Child Protective Services, the investigation that followed revealed years of systematic abuse by the girl's stepfather. The case had opened Teresa's eyes to the crucial role that law enforcement played in protecting the vulnerable, leading her to switch careers and dedicate herself to becoming the kind of officer she wished had been available to help Amy sooner. Teresa had excelled at the police academy, graduating 3rd in her class and earning commendations for both physical fitness and academic performance. Her fluency in Vietnamese had made her invaluable to the Bozeman Police Department, as the city's Asian population had grown significantly over the past decade. She specialized in community outreach and had developed strong relationships with immigrant families who had previously been reluctant to interact with law enforcement. Her apartment, a 1-bedroom unit in a converted Victorian house on Olive Street, was decorated with a mixture of Vietnamese art her mother had given her and modern police equipment she used for off-duty training. Teresa's personal life was carefully balanced between her demanding career and her close-knit family relationships. Every Sunday, she joined her parents and younger brother David for dinner at the restaurant, helping to serve customers during the busy evening rush while catching up on family news. She had been dating Michael Chen, a software engineer at a local tech startup, for 8 months, and their relationship was growing serious. Michael had proposed just 2 weeks earlier during a hiking trip to Hyalite Canyon, and Teresa had accepted, though they hadn't yet told her parents about the engagement, wanting to wait for the right moment during the upcoming Vietnamese New Year celebration. The third member of what would become known as the Bozeman Three was Officer Eric Willis, who arrived at the station at 5:28 a.m., 15 minutes early, as was his custom. At 41, Eric was the veteran of the trio, having served with the Bozeman Police Department for 18 years after completing a tour of duty with the Marine Corps. His military background was evident in everything, from his precisely pressed uniform to his methodical approach to police work. Eric had served 2 deployments in Iraq during the early 2000s, experiences that had left him with both valuable tactical skills and invisible scars that he rarely discussed, even with his closest friends. Eric Willis had been born and raised in Great Falls, Montana, the eldest of 4 children in a family that struggled financially but never lacked for love and support. His father, James Willis, had worked at the Anaconda copper mine until its closure, then spent his remaining working years as a long-haul trucker, often gone for weeks at a time. His mother, Dorothy, had held the family together with a combination of fierce determination and endless patience, working as a nurse at the local hospital while managing the household and helping her children with their homework. Eric's younger siblings had all found success in their own ways. His brother Tom had become an electrician and owned a successful contracting business in Helena. His sister Marie was a physical therapist in Kalispell, and his youngest brother Jake worked as a park ranger in Yellowstone. Eric's decision to join the Marines immediately after high school had been driven partly by financial necessity and partly by a desire to serve his country. The military had given him structure, purpose, and the GI Bill benefits that would later help him complete a degree in criminal justice. His service in Iraq had been marked by several commendations for bravery, including a Bronze Star for actions during a particularly dangerous convoy mission near Fallujah. However, the war had also taken its toll, leaving him with mild PTSD symptoms that he managed through regular counseling sessions and a strict exercise regimen. After completing his military service, Eric had returned to Montana with the intention of using his law enforcement training to serve his home state. He had initially considered joining the Montana Highway Patrol, but had been drawn to the Bozeman Police Department by its reputation for community policing and its commitment to officer development. Over his 18 years with the department, he had worked in various capacities, including patrol, detective work, and training new recruits. His expertise in tactical situations had made him a valuable member of the department's crisis response team, and he had been called upon numerous times to help resolve dangerous situations involving armed suspects or hostage scenarios. Eric's personal life had been more complicated than those of his colleagues. He had married his college girlfriend Lisa shortly after joining the police force, and they had been happy for several years before the strains of police work and his unresolved military trauma had begun to create problems in their relationship. They had divorced amicably after 8 years of marriage, sharing custody of their twin daughters, Emma and Sophia, who were now 15 years old and lived with their mother in Missoula. Eric maintained a strong relationship with his daughters, driving the 2 hours to Missoula every other weekend to spend time with them, attending their soccer games and school events whenever possible. The relationship between the 3 officers was built on mutual respect and shared experiences that had forged them into an effective team. Mark and Eric had worked together for over a decade, developing the kind of intuitive communication that comes from facing dangerous situations side by side. They had been the first responders to a domestic violence call 3 years earlier that had turned into a 6-hour standoff with an armed suspect, and their coordinated response had likely saved the lives of a woman and her 2 children. Teresa, despite being the newest member of the trio, had quickly earned their respect through her calm demeanor under pressure and her ability to de-escalate tense situations through careful communication and cultural sensitivity. The three officers had been assigned to work together as part of a special community policing initiative that had been launched 6 months earlier in response to growing concerns about the interaction between Bozeman's expanding urban development and the surrounding wildlife habitat. Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks had reported increasing numbers of human-wildlife encounters as residential and commercial development pushed deeper into traditional animal corridors, particularly in the areas north and east of the city where new subdivisions were being built in formerly undeveloped land. The officers had received specialized training in wildlife behavior and conflict management, working closely with state wildlife biologists to develop protocols for handling encounters with bears, mountain lions, and other potentially dangerous animals. The morning of April 22nd had been designated as the beginning of what the department called Bear Awareness Week, a public education campaign designed to help residents understand how to minimize conflicts with the grizzly and black bears that were beginning to emerge from their winter dens. The three officers were scheduled to visit several elementary schools that day, presenting a program that taught children how to behave if they encountered bears while hiking or camping with their families. Teresa had spent weeks preparing educational materials and props, including a life-sized stuffed bear that had been donated by a local outdoor recreation store. As the three officers gathered in the vehicle bay at approximately 5:35 a.m., the atmosphere was relaxed and collegial. Mark was reviewing the day's schedule on his tablet, making notes about the timing of their school visits and confirming the addresses of their various stops. Teresa was organizing the educational materials they would need, checking to ensure that all the pamphlets and demonstration props were properly packed and ready for transport. Eric was conducting his customary inspection of their vehicles, checking tire pressure, fluid levels, and radio equipment to ensure everything was in proper working order for the day ahead. The conversation between the three officers that morning would later be reconstructed through security camera footage and the testimonies of survivors, providing investigators with a detailed timeline of the final normal moments before their lives were forever changed. The security cameras, installed throughout the vehicle bay as part of an upgrade completed 18 months earlier, captured high-definition video from multiple angles, including overhead views and side perspectives that would prove crucial in understanding the sequence of events that followed. At 5:41 a.m., Mark mentioned that he had seen fresh bear tracks near his house the previous evening while taking his dog for a walk. His property, located on Goldenstein Lane, about 3 miles north of downtown Bozeman, backed up to a greenbelt area that provided a natural corridor for wildlife moving between the Bridger Mountains and the East Gallatin River. The tracks, which he estimated belonged to a large adult bear, based on their size and depth in the soft spring mud, had been clearly visible in his backyard near the bird feeders that his wife Amanda maintained, despite his regular warnings about attracting wildlife. Teresa responded that her parents had mentioned seeing a bear rummaging through the dumpster behind their restaurant 2 nights earlier, though they hadn't called it in because the animal had moved on quickly without causing any damage. The Golden Lotus restaurant was located in the downtown core, making a bear sighting there particularly unusual and concerning. Eric noted that the department had received 6 bear-related calls in the past week, compared to only 2 for the entire month of March, suggesting that the animals were becoming more active as natural food sources became available and they began to expand their territorial ranges after the long winter months. The discussion of recent bear activity was interrupted at 5:44 a.m. when Sergeant Helen Rodriguez entered the vehicle bay through the interior door that connected to the main station building. At 52 years old, Rodriguez was a 24-year veteran of the department who had earned widespread respect for her calm leadership style and her ability to mentor younger officers. She had grown up in a military family, living in various bases around the country before her father's retirement brought the family to Montana when she was in high school. Her bilingual skills and her experience working with diverse communities had made her an invaluable asset to the department, particularly as Bozeman's population had become increasingly diverse over the past decade. Rodriguez approached the three officers with a slight frown, carrying a clipboard with the night shift's incident reports. "We've got an unusual situation," she began, her voice carrying the tone of someone who had seen enough strange incidents to take anything seriously. Dispatch received a call about 20 minutes ago from a resident on Kagi Boulevard reporting sounds of a large animal moving through the neighborhood. The caller, Mrs. Dorothy Simmons, said she was awakened around 4:30 a.m. by what she described as heavy footsteps and what sounded like something large pushing through bushes in her backyard. Mrs. Dorothy Simmons was a 73-year-old widow who had lived in the same house on Kagi Boulevard for 47 years, having moved there with her late husband Harold shortly after their marriage in 1977. Harold had worked as a civil engineer for the city until his death from a heart attack in 2019, leaving Dorothy alone in the large house where they had raised 3 children. Her property, which occupied nearly an acre at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, was surrounded by mature cottonwood and pine trees that provided privacy, but also created an attractive habitat for various forms of wildlife. Dorothy had always been an early riser, a habit formed during decades of preparing breakfast for her husband and children before they left for work and school. Her bedroom window faced the backyard, and she had become familiar with the normal sounds of the neighborhood over the years. The distant hum of traffic from Interstate 90, the occasional train whistle from the railroad tracks that ran along the north side of town, and the various sounds made by the raccoons, deer, and other small animals that regularly visited her yard. The sounds she had heard that morning were different, much larger and more deliberate than anything she had experienced before. Rodriguez continued her briefing, reading from the incident report that had been filed by the night shift dispatcher. Mrs. Simmons called 911 at 5:22 a.m. She told the dispatcher that she had been lying in bed listening to these sounds for nearly an hour, trying to decide whether to call for help. She described hearing what sounded like a large animal moving through the bushes along the back fence, followed by sounds that she interpreted as something attempting to get into her garbage cans. When she looked out her window, she couldn't see anything clearly because of the darkness and the dense foliage. But she was certain that whatever was out there was much larger than the deer that occasionally visited her yard. Orbital. The location of Mrs. Simmons's house was significant for several reasons that would become clear only in retrospect. Kagi Boulevard ran roughly parallel to the East Gallatin River, following a natural corridor that had been used by wildlife for thousands of years before human development began to encroach on the area. The street was located approximately 1.2 miles southeast of the Bozeman Police Department, connected by a network of residential streets, storm drainage channels, and small parks that could provide cover for a large animal moving through the urban environment. Mark Hill pulled up a map of the area on his tablet, tracing the possible routes that a bear might take from the Kagi Boulevard area to other parts of the city. The most direct path would lead through several residential neighborhoods, crossing busy streets like South 19th Avenue and College Street, before reaching the downtown core where the police station was located. However, there were also several alternative routes that would provide more cover, including the creek bed that ran behind the Bozeman Mall and the railroad right-of-way that passed within half a mile of the police station. Teresa suggested that they should drive by Mrs. Simmons' house after completing their morning briefing, both to check on the elderly woman's welfare and to look for signs of bear activity that might help them determine the animal's current location and likely direction of travel. Eric agreed, noting that early morning bear encounters often indicated animals that were having difficulty finding natural food sources, making them more likely to approach human habitation in search of garbage, pet food, or other attractants. At 5:52 a.m., the three officers were joined by Officer Janet Mitchell, a 5-year veteran who had been assigned to work with them on the Bear Awareness campaign. Mitchell, 31 years old, had grown up on a ranch outside of Livingston and had extensive experience with wildlife management from her childhood spent helping her father deal with predators that threatened their cattle operation. Her practical knowledge of animal behavior had made her a valuable addition to the team, and she had been instrumental in developing the educational materials they would be presenting to schoolchildren throughout the week. Janet Mitchell's background provided a different perspective on wildlife encounters than her urban colleagues. The Mitchell family ranch, established by her great-grandfather in 1923, encompassed 2,400 acres of grazing land and hay fields in the Paradise Valley, south of Livingston. Growing up on the ranch had given Janet first-hand experience with the realities of living in close proximity to predators, including regular encounters with bears, mountain lions and wolves that viewed the ranch's cattle as potential prey. Her father, Robert Mitchell, had taught her to use firearms from an early age, not as a recreational activity, but as a necessary skill for protecting livestock and ensuring family safety. The ranch had experienced its share of predator conflicts over the years, including a memorable incident when Janet was 16 years old and a grizzly bear had killed 2 calves near the main barn. Her father had spent several days tracking the bear with the help of Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks officers, ultimately determining that the animal was an elderly male that had been displaced from its normal territory by younger, more dominant bears. The incident had been resolved when the bear was captured and relocated to a more remote area of Yellowstone National Park, but not before Janet had learned valuable lessons about bear behavior, tracking techniques, and the complex relationship between human land use and wildlife habitat needs. Janet's decision to become a police officer had been influenced partly by her desire to work in a profession that allowed her to help people, and partly by her recognition that traditional ranching was becoming increasingly difficult due to economic pressures and environmental changes. She had completed her law enforcement training at the Montana Public Safety Officer Standards and Training Academy in Helena, where she had excelled in wilderness survival courses and tactical training exercises that drew on her rural upbringing and outdoor skills. As the 4th member of the team, Janet brought a practical, no-nonsense approach to wildlife encounters that complemented the more urban perspectives of her colleagues. She'd been the one to suggest that their bear awareness presentations include specific information about proper food storage techniques, the importance of securing garbage containers, and the need to remove bird feeders and pet food from areas where they might attract bears. Her contributions to the educational program had been based on real-world experience with the consequences of human-wildlife conflicts, giving the presentations a credibility and urgency that resonated with both children and adults. The morning briefing continued with Rodriguez reviewing other incidents from the overnight shift, including 2 domestic disturbance calls, a minor traffic accident on Main Street, and a report of suspicious activity near the university campus that had turned out to be students conducting an unauthorized astronomy observation session. The atmosphere in the vehicle bay remained relaxed and routine, with the officers joking about the various unusual calls they had handled over the years and speculating about whether the reported bear sighting would turn out to be a false alarm caused by a large dog or other misidentified animal. At 6:03 a.m., the routine morning was interrupted by a call from dispatcher Lucy Chen, whose voice crackled through the radio speakers mounted throughout the vehicle bay. Chen, a 10-year veteran of the dispatch center, was known for her calm professionalism and her ability to remain composed during high-stress emergency situations. Her voice that morning carried a note of concern that immediately caught the attention of all 4 officers present in the bay. Unit 7, Unit 12, Unit 15, we have a report of a large animal in the downtown area, Chen announced, using the radio call numbers assigned to Hill, Nguyen, and Willis, respectively. Caller reports seeing what appears to be a bear moving through the alley behind Main Street businesses. Location is approximately the 100 block of East Main Street, near the intersection with North Rouse Avenue. Caller is inside a secure building and reports the animal appears to be moving in a northwesterly direction. The location described by the dispatcher was significant because it placed the reported bear less than 4 blocks from the police station, moving in a direction that could potentially bring it even closer to the downtown core. Main Street was the primary commercial district of Bozeman, lined with restaurants, retail shops, and office buildings that generated significant pedestrian traffic even during early morning hours. The alley behind the buildings provided a corridor of sorts, connecting several blocks and offering cover for an animal attempting to move through the urban environment while avoiding direct contact with humans. Eric Willis immediately moved to his patrol vehicle and activated the mobile data terminal, pulling up a detailed map of the downtown area and marking the reported location of the bear sighting. The distance from the East Main Street location to the police station was approximately 0.3 miles, a route that would take the animal past several businesses that typically opened early, including 2 coffee shops, a bakery, and a restaurant that served breakfast beginning at 6 a.m. The potential for human encounters was significant, particularly given that many downtown employees parked in the alleys behind buildings and would be arriving for work within the next hour. Mark Hill grabbed his radio and responded to the dispatch call, Unit 7 responding. ETA approximately 3 minutes. Request that Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks be notified of possible bear in downtown area. His voice was calm and professional, but his colleagues could detect the underlying tension that came with the recognition that they were potentially dealing with a dangerous situation that could escalate quickly. Teresa Nguyen began gathering the specialized equipment they had received for wildlife encounters, including bear spray, emergency flares, and a high-powered spotlight that could be used to discourage aggressive animal behavior. The department had invested in this equipment 6 months earlier as part of their enhanced wildlife response protocol, working with state wildlife biologists to ensure that officers had the tools necessary to handle encounters safely and effectively. The bear spray, in particular, had been proven effective in numerous field tests, providing a non-lethal method for deterring aggressive bears while minimizing risk to both animals and humans. Janet Mitchell contacted the dispatch center directly using her cell phone, requesting additional information about the caller who had reported the bear sighting. The caller, identified as Marcus Thompson, was the manager of a downtown printing business who had arrived early to prepare for a large order that needed to be completed that day. Thompson had been unloading supplies from his vehicle in the alley behind his shop when he had observed what he described as the largest bear I've ever seen moving between dumpsters approximately 50 yards away. He had immediately retreated into his building and called 911, remaining inside to observe the animal's movements from a secure vantage point. Marcus Thompson, 45 years old, had operated Thompson Printing Services for 12 years, building the business from a small copy shop into a full-service commercial printing operation that served clients throughout the Gallatin Valley. His shop was located in a converted warehouse building that had been constructed in the 1940s, featuring large windows and loading dock doors that provided excellent visibility of the alley area where the bear had been sighted. Thompson had grown up in Bozeman and was familiar with wildlife encounters, having spent considerable time hunting and fishing in the surrounding mountains. but he had never seen a bear in the downtown area and had been shocked by the animal's size and apparent comfort in the urban environment. The printing shop's location in the 100 block of East Main Street placed it at the heart of Bozeman's historic downtown district, surrounded by buildings that dated back to the late 1800s and early 1900s, when the city had been established as a railroad town, serving the mining and agricultural industries of southwestern Montana. The narrow alleys between buildings had been designed for horse-drawn wagons and early automobiles, creating a maze-like network of passages that were now used primarily for deliveries, employee parking, and waste management. These alleys, while convenient for commercial operations, also provided excellent cover for wildlife moving through the urban area. At 6:07 a.m., the four officers made the decision to respond to the bear sighting as a team, recognizing that the situation required both immediate action and careful coordination to ensure public safety. Sergeant Rodriguez approved their response plan, which called for them to approach the area from multiple directions, establish a perimeter around the suspected location, and attempt to safely guide the animal away from downtown toward more suitable habitat. The plan also included protocols for evacuating nearby businesses if necessary and coordinating with state wildlife officials who would be responsible for any long-term management decisions regarding the animal. Mark Hill and Eric Willis departed the police station at 6:09 a.m. in separate patrol vehicles, taking different routes toward the reported bear location in order to approach from opposite directions and minimize the chances of inadvertently driving the animal toward areas with higher concentrations of people. Their vehicles were equipped with public address systems that could be used to warn pedestrians and vehicle traffic, as well as emergency lighting that would help establish their presence and authority in managing the developing situation. Teresa Nguyen and Janet Mitchell remained at the station for an additional 2 minutes, coordinating with the dispatch center to ensure that emergency medical services were placed on standby and that Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks officers were en route to assist with the situation. Their role would be to provide backup support and manage any additional complications that might arise, including the possibility that multiple animals were involved, or that the reported bear was a female with cubs, which would significantly increase the danger level of any encounter. The dispatch center, located on the second floor of the police station building, had been upgraded 18 months earlier with new computer systems and communication equipment designed to handle multiple emergency situations simultaneously. Dispatcher Lucy Chen was working alongside her supervisor, Sergeant David Walsh, monitoring radio traffic and coordinating the response to the bear sighting while also maintaining awareness of other ongoing police activities throughout the city. The center's large display screens showed real-time maps of officer locations, weather conditions, and traffic patterns that could affect emergency response times. Lucy Chen had been with the Bozeman Police Department Dispatch Center for 10 years, having started as a civilian employee immediately after completing her associate's degree in criminal justice from Montana State University. Her calm demeanor and excellent communication skills had made her invaluable during high-stress situations, and she had received commendations for her handling of several major incidents, including a multi-vehicle accident on Interstate 90 that had required coordination between local police, state highway patrol, fire department, and emergency medical services. Her ability to remain focused and provide clear, accurate information to responding officers had undoubtedly saved lives during her tenure with the department. The morning of April 22nd presented unique challenges for the dispatch center because the bear sighting occurred during the shift change period when night shift personnel were preparing to leave and day shift employees were arriving and getting up to speed on overnight activities. This transition period, which typically lasted from 6 a.m. to 6:30 a.m., required careful coordination to ensure that critical information was properly communicated and that responding officers had all the support they needed. Sergeant Walsh, who had worked in law enforcement for 22 years, took personal responsibility for managing the bear response, recognizing that wildlife encounters could escalate quickly and unpredictably. At 6:11 a.m., Officer Hill radioed from his position on North Rouse Avenue, reporting that he had arrived at the perimeter of the area where the bear had been sighted, but had not yet observed the animal. His location provided a clear view of the alley system behind the Main Street businesses, and he had positioned his patrol vehicle to block vehicle access to the area while maintaining his own ability to move quickly if necessary. The early morning light was beginning to improve visibility, but shadows cast by buildings and trees still created numerous areas where a large animal could remain hidden from observation. Officer Willis, approaching from the south on Grand Avenue, reported similar findings, noting that the alley area appeared quiet, but that several dumpsters had been disturbed, with garbage scattered around the containers in a pattern consistent with large animal activity. His training in wildlife behavior suggested that the bear had been foraging for food, likely attracted by the restaurant waste that was regularly deposited in the dumpsters by nearby businesses. The scattered garbage included food containers, packaging materials, and organic waste that would be highly attractive to a hungry bear emerging from winter hibernation. The pattern of disturbed dumpsters provided valuable information about the bear's likely size, behavior, and current condition. The scattered refuse suggested an animal that was actively searching for food rather than simply passing through the area, indicating that it might be a bear that had not yet found adequate natural food sources following its emergence from hibernation. This behavior pattern was concerning because hungry bears were more likely to remain in areas where they had found food, increasing the chances of human encounters and potentially aggressive behavior. Teresa Nguyen and Janet Mitchell departed the police station at 6:13 a.m., driving toward the downtown area to provide backup support and establish a secondary perimeter that would prevent the bear from moving toward areas with higher concentrations of people. Their route took them north on Rouse Avenue, then west on Main Street, allowing them to observe pedestrian and vehicle traffic patterns that might need to be managed if the situation escalated. The number of people in the downtown area was still relatively small at that early hour, but several businesses were beginning to open and employee parking lots were starting to fill with vehicles. The timing of the incident was particularly significant because it occurred during what wildlife biologists call the dawn activity period, when bears are naturally most active as they search for food following a night of rest. This behavioral pattern, combined with the limited natural food sources available in early spring, created conditions that increased the likelihood of bears venturing into urban areas in search of easily accessible calories. The bears emerging from hibernation in April typically had depleted fat reserves and were motivated by intense hunger to find food sources, making them potentially more bold and aggressive than they might be later in the year when natural food sources were more abundant. At 6:15 a.m., Marcus Thompson called the dispatch center again, reporting that he could see the bear from his vantage point in the printing shop and that the animal appeared to be moving in a northwesterly direction through the alley system. His description of the bear's movement patterns provided crucial information for the responding officers, allowing them to anticipate the animal's likely path and position themselves accordingly. Thompson estimated the bear's weight at approximately 400 pounds, based on its massive build and the ease with which it had overturned heavy dumpsters during its foraging activities. The bear's estimated size placed it in the category of a large adult male grizzly, significantly more dangerous than the black bears that more commonly ventured into urban areas. Adult male grizzlies could weigh between 300 and 800 pounds, with some exceptional individuals exceeding 1,000 pounds and possessed strength that was difficult for most people to comprehend. A 400-pound grizzly could easily break down doors, overturn vehicles, and inflict devastating injuries on humans, making the developing situation extremely serious from a public safety perspective. Thompson's continued observations provided a real-time tracking system that allowed the responding officers to coordinate their movements with the bear's location. His position in the second-floor office of the printing shop gave him an elevated view of several blocks of alley systems, making him an invaluable asset in monitoring the animal's movements and direction of travel. The dispatch center maintained continuous radio contact with Thompson through Lucy Chen, creating a communication link that kept all responding personnel informed of the bear's location and behavior. Officer Hill reported at 6:17 a.m. that he had repositioned his patrol vehicle to North Wallace Avenue, anticipating the bear's movement based on Thompson's observations and the natural corridor created by the alley system. His new position provided better visibility of the area, while also allowing him to establish a blocking position that would discourage the bear from moving further into the densely populated downtown core. The strategy was to create a series of obstacles and deterrents that would encourage the bear to turn back toward less populated areas where it could be safely managed by wildlife officials. The coordination between the 4 officers and the dispatch center represented the implementation of protocols that had been developed through months of planning and training with Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks personnel. These protocols emphasized the importance of maintaining safe distances from potentially dangerous wildlife while using positioning, noise, and visual deterrents to influence animal behavior. The goal was always to resolve wildlife encounters without harm to either animals or humans, recognizing that bears were valuable components of the local ecosystem that deserved protection even when they created public safety challenges. At 6:19 a.m., the situation took a significant turn when Thompson reported that the bear had changed direction and was now moving directly north through the alley system, heading toward the area of downtown that included the police station, city hall, and several other government buildings. This change in direction was concerning because it brought the animal toward an area that would soon experience increased human activity as government employees and court personnel arrived for work. The timing also meant that the bear was moving toward the police station where additional officers were arriving for their shifts, potentially creating a convergence of people and wildlife that could prove dangerous. Officer Willis immediately adjusted his position, moving north on Grand Avenue to parallel the bear's new route, while maintaining a safe distance that would avoid startling or cornering the animal. His military training had included instruction in tactical movement and positioning, skills that proved valuable in managing the fluid situation as the bear's location and direction of travel continued to change. The key was to remain flexible and responsive, while maintaining the overall strategic objective of guiding the bear away from populated areas. Teresa Nguyen contacted Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks Dispatch directly, providing detailed information about the bear's size, location, and movement patterns to help the responding wildlife officers prepare for the most effective management strategy. The State Wildlife Agency maintained specialized equipment for handling large predators, including tranquilizer equipment, transport cages, and trained personnel who could safely capture and relocate problem animals. However, their response time from the nearest field station was estimated at 20 to 30 minutes, meaning that local law enforcement would need to manage the immediate situation until specialized help arrived. The coordination with state wildlife officials represented an important aspect of Montana's approach to human-wildlife conflict management. State law required that potentially dangerous wildlife encounters be handled by trained wildlife professionals whenever possible, with local law enforcement providing support and public safety management. This division of responsibility recognized both the specialized skills required to safely handle large predators and the important role that law enforcement played in protecting public safety during wildlife emergencies. Janet Mitchell took responsibility for coordinating with other city departments that might be affected by the developing situation, including the fire department, emergency medical services, and city facilities management. Her calls resulted in the temporary closure of several downtown parking areas and the establishment of alternative routes for employees who needed to reach government buildings during the morning shift change. These proactive measures helped reduce the number of people in the immediate area while maintaining essential city services. At 6:22 a.m., Thompson provided what would prove to be his final radio update, reporting that the bear had moved out of his visual range, but appeared to be continuing north toward the area around the police station. His last observation placed the animal approximately 3 blocks south of the station, moving through a residential area that included several apartment complexes and single-family homes where residents might be leaving for work or walking dogs during the early morning hours. The transition from the commercial alley system to residential streets created new challenges for tracking the animal and predicting its likely path of movement. The loss of visual contact with the bear marked a critical transition point in the developing emergency, shifting the response from active tracking to area containment and public warning procedures. Officer Hill immediately began broadcasting public safety announcements through his patrol vehicle's public address system, advising any residents in the area to remain indoors and secure their homes until the situation could be resolved. These announcements were coordinated with emergency notifications sent through the city's automated alert system, reaching registered residents through phone calls, text messages, and email alerts. The public notification system had been implemented 3 years earlier, following a series of severe weather events that had highlighted the need for rapid communication with residents during emergency situations. The system could reach thousands of registered users within minutes, providing critical safety information and instructions that could help prevent injuries during wildlife encounters, natural disasters, or other emergency situations. The bear warning messages sent that morning advised residents to avoid outdoor activities, secure garbage containers and pet food, and report any wildlife sightings to emergency dispatch immediately. Officer Willis positioned his patrol vehicle at the intersection of Olive Street and North Rouse Avenue, creating a checkpoint that would allow him to observe the bear if it continued on its anticipated northward path, while also providing a blocking position that could deter the animal from entering the most densely populated areas of downtown. His position also provided rapid access to the police station if additional coordination or equipment was needed to manage the evolving situation. The strategic positioning of the responding officers created an informal perimeter around the area where the bear was believed to be located, with multiple escape routes available for the animal to retreat toward less populated areas. This approach balanced the need to protect public safety with wildlife management principles that emphasized avoiding actions that might cause an animal to feel trapped or threatened, which could trigger defensive aggression and make the situation significantly more dangerous. At 6:24 a.m., Sergeant Rodriguez made the decision to implement the department's Code Yellow protocol for wildlife emergencies, which involved activating additional personnel, establishing a command post, and coordinating with all relevant agencies to ensure a comprehensive response to the developing situation. The Code Yellow designation indicated a potentially serious situation that required elevated response procedures, but had not yet reached the level of immediate danger that would trigger a Code Red emergency response. The Code Yellow activation resulted in the immediate notification of off-duty officers who lived in the Bozeman area providing them with the option to respond to the station to assist with the wildlife emergency if their schedules permitted. It also triggered automatic notification of the mayor's office, city emergency management personnel, and media relations staff who might need to coordinate public information efforts if the situation continued to develop. These notification procedures ensured that all relevant authorities were aware of the developing situation and could provide support or guidance as needed. The command post was established in the main briefing room of the police station, where Rodriguez could coordinate communications with responding officers, monitor radio traffic from multiple agencies, and make strategic decisions about resource allocation and response tactics. Large wall-mounted displays showed real-time maps of the area, weather conditions, and the locations of all responding personnel, providing a comprehensive view of the situation that would be essential for effective command and control. Officer Nguyen and Officer Mitchell arrived at their assigned positions at 6:26 a.m., completing the perimeter around the area where the bear was believed to be located. Their positions provided additional observation points and created multiple layers of response capability if the situation required rapid adjustment or escalation. The coordination between all four officers was maintained through continuous radio contact and the command post, ensuring that everyone remained informed of developments and could adapt their tactics as needed. The bear's movements during this period remained unknown to the responding officers, creating a period of tension and uncertainty as they maintained their positions and waited for additional sightings or other indications of the animal's location. The lack of immediate visual contact with the bear was not unusual in wildlife emergency responses, as large animals were often able to find cover and concealment even in urban environments, particularly during early morning hours when lighting conditions were less than optimal. At 6:28 a.m., the first Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks officer arrived at the scene, Corporal James Martinez bringing specialized equipment and expertise to the developing situation. Martinez, a 12-year veteran of the Wildlife Agency, had extensive experience with bear management and had been involved in dozens of similar situations throughout his career. His arrival marked the beginning of a more specialized phase of the response, with law enforcement officers shifting to a supporting role while wildlife professionals took primary responsibility for animal management decisions. Corporal Martinez immediately established contact with Sergeant Rodriguez and the command post, receiving a comprehensive briefing on the situation and reviewing the positions and observations of all responding personnel. His assessment of the available information led him to conclude that they were likely dealing with a large adult male grizzly bear that had become habituated to finding food in urban areas, making it potentially more dangerous than a bear that was simply passing through on its way to more suitable habitat. This assessment had important implications for management strategy, as habituated bears were often more difficult to deter and more likely to return to urban areas even after being relocated. The arrival of wildlife management personnel also brought access to specialized equipment that was not available to local law enforcement, including tranquilizer guns, bear traps, rubber bullets designed to deter aggressive animals, and transport equipment that could safely contain a large bear during relocation efforts. However, the use of this equipment required careful consideration of environmental factors, animal behavior, and public safety concerns that made immediate action inadvisable until the bear's exact location and current behavior could be determined. At 6:31 a.m., the situation remained stable but unresolved, with responding personnel maintaining their positions while additional resources continued to arrive at the scene. The morning shift change at the police station had been temporarily suspended to avoid increasing the number of people in the immediate area, and several downtown businesses had voluntarily delayed their opening times in response to public safety advisories. These precautionary measures helped reduce the potential for human-wildlife encounters while providing responding agencies with the time and space needed to develop an effective management strategy. The temporary suspension of normal activities in the downtown area represented a significant disruption to the daily routines of hundreds of residents and business owners. But it also demonstrated the community's understanding of the serious nature of wildlife encounters and their willingness to cooperate with public safety measures. Local news media had been notified of the developing situation and were beginning to arrive at the perimeter of the response area, requiring additional coordination to ensure that media activities did not interfere with emergency response operations. The media response to wildlife emergencies had become an increasingly important consideration in recent years, as public interest in human-wildlife conflicts had grown alongside concerns about development impacts on traditional animal habitats. The Bozeman Police Department had developed specific protocols for managing media access during wildlife emergencies, balancing the public's right to information with the need to maintain operational security and avoid actions that might escalate dangerous situations. Officer Hill reported at 6:33 a.m. that he had observed what appeared to be fresh bear tracks in soft mud near a storm drain outlet on North Wallace Avenue, suggesting that the animal had passed through the area within the past hour. The tracks, which showed the distinctive claw marks and pad impressions characteristic of a large bear, provided the first physical evidence of the animal's presence since Thompson's visual sightings had ended. The location of the tracks also suggested that the bear was continuing to move north, potentially heading toward the area around the police station and other government buildings. The storm drain system in Bozeman had been identified in previous wildlife studies as a potential corridor for animal movement through urban areas, as the concrete channels provided cover and often contained water sources that attracted both prey animals and predators. The drainage system connected various parts of the city and ultimately led to the East Gallatin River, potentially providing a route for wildlife to move between different habitat areas while avoiding direct contact with human activities. Corporal Martinez examined photographs of the tracks that Officer Hill transmitted through the mobile data system, confirming that they were consistent with a large adult grizzly bear and noting details about stride length and depth that provided additional information about the animal's size and condition. His analysis suggested that they were dealing with a healthy, well-fed bear that was moving purposefully rather than wandering randomly, which could indicate either territorial behavior or focused foraging activities that made the animal's future movements somewhat predictable. The ability to predict animal movements was crucial for developing effective management strategies that could resolve the situation safely for both humans and wildlife. Bears, despite their reputation for unpredictable behavior, actually followed relatively consistent patterns based on food availability, territorial considerations, and threat assessment. Understanding these patterns allowed experienced wildlife managers to anticipate likely animal responses to various management tactics and choose approaches that were most likely to achieve positive outcomes. At 6:35 a.m., Officer Willis reported observing what appeared to be a large animal moving through the shadows near a residential area approximately 2 blocks south of the police station. His sighting was brief and partially obscured by parked vehicles and landscaping, but the size and movement pattern were consistent with the bear that had been tracked through the downtown area. The animal appeared to be moving steadily northward, following a path that would bring it even closer to the area of concentrated government buildings and increased human activity. The proximity of the bear to the police station created particular concerns for the safety of personnel who were arriving for work and the security of the facility itself. The station building, constructed in 1987, had been designed with security considerations in mind, but these had focused primarily on human threats rather than wildlife encounters. The building's ground-level windows, exterior doors, and vehicle bay entrances had not been designed to withstand the strength of a large bear, potentially creating vulnerabilities that had not been previously considered. Sergeant Rodriguez made the decision to upgrade the incident to Code Red status, indicating an immediate threat to public safety that required maximum response resources and emergency procedures. The Code Red designation triggered automatic notification of the mayor, city emergency management director, and state emergency response coordinators, while also activating mutual aid agreements with surrounding law enforcement agencies that could provide additional personnel and resources if needed. The Code Red activation also resulted in the implementation of emergency lockdown procedures for all city government buildings in the downtown area, including the police station, city hall, courthouse, and library. These procedures required all personnel to remain inside secure areas, prohibited unnecessary movement between buildings, and established specific protocols for emergency evacuation if the situation deteriorated further. The lockdown affected approximately 150 city employees and dozens of citizens who had been conducting business at various government offices. Officer Nguyen, positioned on East Main Street, reported at 6:37 a.m. that she had received a radio call from a concerned citizen who had observed a large bear in the parking area behind the police station. The caller, identified as Dr. Sarah Chen, a veterinarian who operated a clinic 6 blocks from the police station, had been driving to work when she observed what she described as an enormous grizzly bear near the rear entrance of the police facility. Her professional experience with large animals gave her report additional credibility, and her description of the bear's size and behavior suggested that the animal had indeed reached the immediate vicinity of the police station. Dr. Chen's veterinary clinic, established 8 years earlier, served a large geographic area that included both urban pet owners and rural ranchers who needed medical care for livestock and working animals. Her experience with wildlife emergencies at ranches throughout the Gallatin Valley had given her extensive knowledge of bear behavior, and her estimate that the animal weighed between 450 and 500 pounds indicated that they were dealing with an exceptionally large and potentially dangerous individual. Her report also noted that the bear appeared calm but alert, suggesting that it was not currently agitated or displaying aggressive behavior. The veterinarian's location at the time of her sighting placed the bear less than 100 yards from the rear entrance of the police station, in an area that included employee parking, evidence storage buildings, and maintenance facilities. This location was particularly concerning because it was adjacent to the vehicle bay, where Officers Hill, Nguyen, and Willis had been conducting their morning briefing just 30 minutes earlier. The bear's presence in this area created immediate danger for any personnel who might need to enter or exit the building, while also raising concerns about potential property damage to police vehicles and equipment. Corporal Martinez immediately repositioned himself to coordinate the response from a location that provided visual access to the rear of the police station, working with the command post to ensure that all personnel were aware of the bear's current location and the associated safety risks. His priority was to establish the animal's current behavior pattern and determine whether it was actively seeking food, establishing territory, or simply attempting to find a route back to more suitable habitat. At 6:39 a.m., the situation escalated dramatically when motion sensors in the police station's vehicle bay detected large-scale movement and triggered automatic security alerts throughout the building. The sensors, installed as part of a security upgrade 18 months earlier, were designed to detect unauthorized human entry, but were sensitive enough to register the movement of any large object within the bay area. The activation of multiple sensors simultaneously suggested that something very large was moving through the vehicle bay, confirming the worst fears of responding personnel. Security camera footage from the vehicle bay, monitored in real time from the command post, revealed that the large grizzly bear had somehow gained access to the interior of the police facility and was moving between parked patrol vehicles. The animal appeared calm, but was actively investigating the vehicles and equipment, using its powerful sense of smell to examine areas where food might be stored. The bear's presence inside the secure facility created an unprecedented emergency situation that required immediate action to protect personnel while avoiding actions that might agitate the animal and trigger aggressive behavior. The entry point used by the bear was quickly identified as the malfunctioning Eastern Bay door that had been experiencing mechanical problems for several weeks. The door's electronic locking mechanism had failed to engage completely, leaving a gap of approximately 8 inches at the bottom that a determined bear could exploit by using its strength to force the door open further. Security footage showed the animal spending several minutes manipulating the door before successfully creating an opening large enough to squeeze through, demonstrating both intelligence and persistence that was characteristic of bears that had become habituated to human environments. Sergeant Rodriguez immediately ordered the evacuation of all non-essential personnel from the police station building, while establishing emergency communication procedures that would allow command and control functions to continue from an alternate location. The evacuation procedures, which had been developed for human threats such as armed suspects or bomb threats, required modification to address the unique challenges posed by a large bear inside the building. The primary concern was ensuring that evacuating personnel did not inadvertently encounter the animal, which could trigger defensive behavior and result in serious injuries or fatalities. The presence of the bear inside the police station created a complex tactical situation that required careful coordination between law enforcement, wildlife management, and emergency medical personnel. The bear's exact location within the building was monitored through security cameras, but the animal's movements were unpredictable and its potential for causing injury or property damage was significant. The situation also raised questions about how to safely remove the animal from the building without causing harm to either the bear or responding personnel. Officer Mitchell, positioned outside the building, coordinated the establishment of medical triage areas and emergency treatment capabilities in anticipation of potential injuries during the resolution of the crisis. Gallatin County Emergency Medical Services had positioned 2 advanced life support ambulances at the scene, with additional resources on standby and helicopter emergency medical services pre-positioned at Bozeman Deaconess Hospital. These medical preparations reflected the serious nature of potential injuries that could result from bear encounters, including massive trauma from claws and teeth, crushing injuries from the animal's weight and strength, and psychological trauma that might require immediate intervention. At 6:42 a.m., the 3 officers who had been conducting the morning briefing in the vehicle bay, Hill, Nguyen, and Willis, made the fateful decision to enter the building through the main entrance in an attempt to assess the situation and assist with the emergency response. Their decision was based on their familiarity with the building layout, their training in emergency response procedures, and their sense of responsibility for protecting their colleagues and the community. However, their entry into the building would ultimately place them in direct contact with the bear, leading to the tragic events that would forever change their lives and shock the Bozeman community. The decision to enter the building was made without full consultation with the command post or wildlife management personnel, reflecting the rapidly evolving nature of the crisis and the instinctive response of trained officers to move toward danger in order to protect others. Their actions were consistent with their training and professional obligations, but the unique nature of a wildlife emergency inside a police facility created circumstances that traditional law enforcement tactics were not designed to address. The three officers entered the building at 6:43 a.m. through the main entrance, which was located approximately 50 yards from the vehicle bay where the bear was believed to be located. Their plan was to move carefully through the building, using security camera feeds to track the animal's location, while positioning themselves to assist with evacuation procedures and provide backup support for whatever resolution strategy was ultimately implemented. Their movement through the building was coordinated with the command post through radio communication, ensuring that their locations were known and that they could receive immediate updates about the bear's activities. The interior layout of the Bozeman Police Department building consisted of several main areas: the public entrance and reception area, administrative offices, the main briefing room that was serving as the command post, detention facilities, evidence storage areas, and the vehicle bay where the bear was currently located. The hallways connecting these areas were designed for efficiency and security rather than wildlife management, with multiple corners, doorways, and intersections that could create unexpected encounters between humans and animals. As the three officers moved through the building, security camera footage showed the bear becoming increasingly agitated, possibly due to the unfamiliar scents and sounds associated with human activity or the stress of being confined in an artificial environment. The animal began moving more rapidly between vehicles, occasionally standing on its hind legs to investigate higher surfaces, and displaying body language that wildlife experts later identified as indicative of rising stress and potential defensive behavior. Officer Hill, who was leading the group through the building, reported at 6:44 a.m. that they could hear the sounds of the bear's activities in the vehicle bay, including what appeared to be scratching or clawing at metal surfaces and the movement of heavy objects. These sounds provided real-time information about the animal's location and activities, but also indicated that the bear was becoming more active and potentially more dangerous as stress levels increased. The acoustic signature of the bear's movements, heavy footsteps, scraping sounds, and occasional vocalizations created an atmosphere of tension and apprehension as the three officers moved through the familiar hallways of their workplace, now transformed into a dangerous and unpredictable environment. Their training had prepared them for many types of emergency situations, but the combination of wildlife management and tactical response in a confined space presented unique challenges that required improvisation and careful judgment. Officer Nguyen, bringing up the rear of the group, maintained continuous radio contact with the command post, providing updates on their location and the sounds they were hearing from the vehicle bay. Her communications training and calm demeanor under pressure made her the natural choice for maintaining the vital link between the officers inside the building and the personnel, coordinating the overall response from outside. Her radio reports provided crucial situational awareness that would later prove invaluable in reconstructing the sequence of events. At 6:45 a.m., the three officers reached the corridor that led directly to the vehicle bay, positioning themselves approximately 20 yards from the entrance to the area where the bear was located. From this position, they could clearly hear the animal's activities and occasionally glimpse movement through the glass panels that provided visual access between different areas of the building. The bear appeared to be investigating one of the patrol vehicles, possibly attracted by food odors from meals that officers had eaten in their vehicles during previous shifts. The decision point that would determine the outcome of the encounter occurred when the officers observed that the bear was positioned near the interior door that provided access from the vehicle bay to the main building. If the animal discovered this access point and managed to open it, the bear would have free access to the entire police station, including areas where civilian employees and visitors might be present. The potential for multiple casualties in such a scenario made immediate action necessary, despite the risks involved. Officer Willis, drawing on his military training and tactical experience, suggested that they attempt to create a distraction that would draw the bear's attention away from the interior door, while wildlife management personnel prepared tranquilizer equipment or other specialized tools for safely managing the situation. His plan involved making noise and movement that would attract the bear's attention, while maintaining safe distances and escape routes that would allow the officers to retreat if the animal became aggressive. The tactical situation was complicated by the confined space of the vehicle bay, which limited both visibility and movement options for the officers, while also restricting the bear's ability to retreat or escape if it felt threatened. Wildlife management principles emphasized the importance of providing escape routes for animals in stress situations. But the architectural constraints of the building made this extremely difficult to achieve. The combination of tactical law enforcement and wildlife management considerations created a complex decision-making environment where traditional approaches might not apply. Officer Hill made the decision to attempt to secure the interior door between the vehicle bay and the main building, preventing the bear from accessing other areas of the facility while wildlife experts prepared more specialized intervention strategies. His plan required him to move close enough to the door to activate the electronic locking mechanism, a distance that would place him within the bear's potential striking range if the animal detected his presence and perceived him as a threat. The electronic locking system for the interior doors had been installed as part of the security upgrades completed 18 months earlier, providing the ability to secure different areas of the building independently during emergency situations. However, the system had been designed primarily for human security threats and had not been tested or evaluated for use during wildlife emergencies. The activation of the locks required manual input at a control panel located near each door, necessitating close approach by personnel who would be at significant risk if the bear detected their presence. At 6:46 a.m., Officer Hill began his careful approach toward the interior door, moving slowly and quietly to avoid attracting the bear's attention, while Officer Nguyen and Officer Willis maintained overwatch positions that would allow them to provide assistance or create diversions if the situation deteriorated. The approach required Hill to move through an area with limited cover and concealment, making him vulnerable to detection by an animal whose senses were far superior to those of humans. Security camera footage from multiple angles captured the approach in detail, showing Hill's careful movement through the corridor while the bear continued its investigation of patrol vehicles approximately 15 yards away. The animal appeared focused on its exploration activities and did not initially detect the officer's presence, providing a brief window of opportunity for Hill to reach the door controls and activate the security locks. The tension during Hill's approach was palpable among all personnel monitoring the situation, as the success or failure of his mission would determine whether the crisis could be contained to the vehicle bay or would escalate to involve the entire police facility. The stakes were enormous, with the potential for multiple casualties if the bear gained access to other areas of the building where personnel might be trapped without adequate escape routes or protective barriers. Officer Nguyen maintained a running commentary through her radio communications, providing real-time updates on both Hill's progress and the bear's activities to the command post and other responding personnel. Her calm, professional demeanor helped maintain situational awareness and coordination despite the extreme stress of the situation, demonstrating the importance of communication skills and emotional control during emergency responses. At 6:47 a.m., the situation reached its critical turning point when the bear suddenly detected Officer Hill's presence and turned toward him with a speed and agility that was shocking for such a large animal. The bear's reaction was immediate and instinctive, rising to its full height on hind legs and emitting a loud vocalization that served as both a warning and an expression of territorial dominance. The animal's posture and behavior indicated that it perceived Hill as a potential threat and was preparing to defend itself through aggressive action. Hill's training and experience allowed him to recognize the signs of impending attack, but his position near the door left him with limited options for retreat or evasive action. The corridor layout that had seemed strategically advantageous moments earlier now became a trap, with the bear positioned between Hill and the most direct escape routes back to the main building. His only option was to continue toward the door controls, while hoping that his colleagues could create sufficient distraction to prevent or redirect the bear's aggressive response. The bear's charge began at 6:47:23 a.m., according to security camera timestamps, with the animal dropping to all fours and accelerating toward Officer Hill with a speed that covered the intervening distance in less than 3 seconds. The attack was captured from multiple camera angles, providing investigators with detailed footage that would later be used to analyze the sequence of events and develop improved protocols for similar situations in the future. Officer Willis immediately attempted to create a distraction by shouting and moving toward an alternate entrance to the vehicle bay, hoping to draw the bear's attention away from Hill and provide his colleague with an opportunity to escape. His actions were brave but ultimately ineffective, as the bear remained focused on Hill as the primary target and continued its aggressive advance without deviation from its chosen path. Officer Nguyen drew her service weapon and fired 2 warning shots into the air, hoping that the loud noise would startle the bear and cause it to retreat or hesitate long enough for Hill to reach safety. However, the confined space of the building amplified the sound of the gunshots, and the bear's response was to become even more agitated and aggressive, interpreting the loud noises as additional threats that required immediate defensive action. The bear reached Officer Hill at 6:47:26 a.m., striking him with its front paws and knocking him to the ground with tremendous force. The impact was captured clearly by security cameras, showing the devastating power of the animal's attack and the immediate incapacitation of the human target. Hill's protective vest and equipment provided minimal protection against the bear's claws and crushing weight, and he was rendered unconscious within seconds of the initial contact. Officer Willis, realizing that Hill was in mortal danger, abandoned his distraction attempts and moved directly toward the bear, drawing his service weapon and preparing to fire at the animal despite the risks involved in shooting within the confined space of the building. His decision to engage directly with the bear reflected his military training and his commitment to protecting his fellow officers, even at the cost of his own safety. The bear's attack on Hill continued for approximately 15 seconds, with the animal using its claws and teeth to inflict severe injuries on the fallen officer. The nature and extent of these injuries would not be fully understood until Hill reached the hospital, but security footage showed the bear's actions were consistent with typical grizzly bear defensive behavior, focused on neutralizing what it perceived as a threat rather than feeding or territorial behavior. Officer Willis fired his first shot at 6:47:41 a.m., striking the bear in the shoulder and causing it to release Hill and turn toward this new threat. The gunshot was effective in stopping the attack on Hill, but also redirected the bear's aggression toward Willis, who now found himself the primary target of an injured and increasingly enraged animal. His position near the alternate entrance provided somewhat better escape routes than Hill had available, but also placed him in direct confrontation with a wounded predator. The bear's charge toward Willis was even more aggressive than its initial attack on Hill, driven by pain from the gunshot wound and the heightened stress of being trapped in an unfamiliar environment with multiple human threats. Willis was able to fire 2 additional shots before the bear reached him, both striking the animal in the torso but failing to immediately incapacitate it due to the bear's massive size and the layers of fat and muscle that protected its vital organs. Officer Nguyen, witnessing the attacks on both of her colleagues, made the decision to enter the vehicle bay directly in an attempt to provide assistance and create additional options for escape or tactical response. Her entry into the bay placed all three officers in immediate contact with the bear, creating the scenario that wildlife experts had most feared: multiple humans trapped in a confined space with a large, aggressive predator that perceived them all as threats to its survival. The bear struck Willis at 6:47:58 a.m., knocking him backward into a parked patrol vehicle with sufficient force to shatter the rear window and deploy the vehicle's airbag systems. The impact caused severe injuries to Willis's back and left arm, though his tactical positioning and defensive movements prevented the more catastrophic injuries that Hill had sustained. Willis remained conscious and continued to pose a perceived threat to the bear, which maintained its aggressive posture and prepared for additional attacks. Officer Nguyen positioned herself near the main entrance to the vehicle bay, attempting to create a crossfire situation that would divide the bear's attention between multiple targets, while also providing covering fire for her injured colleagues. Her tactical training had included scenarios involving multiple threats and civilian protection. But the unique challenges of engaging a large predator in close quarters required improvisation and split-second decision-making under extreme stress. At 6:48:05 a.m., the bear turned toward Officer Nguyen, apparently recognizing her as the most immediate threat due to her position and aggressive posture. The animal's approach toward Nguyen was more cautious than its previous charges, possibly due to the cumulative effects of multiple gunshot wounds or a growing awareness that it was facing multiple armed opponents. However, the bear's intent remained clearly aggressive, and its size and strength made it capable of inflicting fatal injuries despite its wounds. Nguyen fired 4 shots in rapid succession as the bear approached, demonstrating excellent marksmanship under extreme stress as all 4 rounds struck the animal in the chest and neck area. Her shooting stance and technique reflected extensive training and practice, though the bear's momentum and determination carried it forward despite the significant wounds it had sustained. The effectiveness of handgun ammunition against large bears had been debated among wildlife experts for years, and this encounter would provide tragic real-world data about the limitations of standard police firearms when confronting massive predators. The bear reached Nguyen at 6:48:12 a.m., striking her with both front paws and driving her backward against the concrete wall of the vehicle bay. The impact was devastating, with security footage showing the tremendous force of the blow and the immediate collapse of the officer under the bear's weight. Unlike the attacks on her male colleagues, the bear's assault on Nguyen appeared more focused on her torso, with claws penetrating her protective vest and causing internal injuries that would prove fatal despite the best efforts of emergency medical personnel. The attack on Officer Nguyen continued for nearly 20 seconds, making it the most prolonged and severe of the 3 encounters. The bear's behavior during this phase suggested a combination of defensive aggression and the disorientation that can occur when large animals suffer multiple gunshot wounds and blood loss. The confined space of the vehicle bay prevented the bear from retreating after neutralizing what it perceived as threats, trapping it in continued contact with humans and perpetuating the cycle of violence. Officer Willis, despite his significant injuries, managed to fire 2 additional shots at the bear while it was attacking Nguyen, both rounds striking the animal in the hindquarters and causing it to release its grip on the female officer. Willis's actions undoubtedly saved Nguyen's life by shortening the duration of the attack, though her injuries were already severe enough to be life-threatening. His continued engagement, despite his own wounds, demonstrated the extraordinary courage and dedication that characterized all 3 officers during this tragic encounter. The bear, now suffering from at least 8 gunshot wounds and significant blood loss, began to show signs of weakness and disorientation that indicated the cumulative effects of its injuries were beginning to impair its abilities. However, the animal remained dangerous and unpredictable, capable of inflicting additional serious injuries on anyone who came within its reach. The combination of pain, stress, and injury created a situation where the bear's behavior became increasingly erratic and difficult to predict. At 6:48:35 a.m., Corporal Martinez and 2 additional Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks officers, entered the vehicle bay through the damaged exterior door, equipped with tranquilizer guns and other specialized equipment for managing the wounded bear. Their entry marked the beginning of the final phase of the encounter, as they possessed both the equipment and expertise necessary to safely incapacitate the animal while providing medical assistance to the injured officers. The wildlife officer's approach was methodical and professional, reflecting years of experience with dangerous animal encounters and specialized training in the use of tranquilizer equipment under high-stress conditions. Their priority was to quickly assess the condition of both the bear and the human victims, then implement the most appropriate strategy for safely resolving the situation while minimizing additional harm to all involved parties. Martinez's assessment of the situation revealed the full scope of the tragedy. Officer Hill was unconscious and suffering from severe lacerations and possible internal injuries. Officer Willis was conscious, but had sustained significant trauma to his back and arm, and Officer Nguyen was conscious but experiencing symptoms consistent with massive internal bleeding and potentially fatal chest wounds. The bear, while significantly weakened by multiple gunshot wounds, remained a threat and required immediate action to prevent additional attacks. The first tranquilizer dart was fired at 6:48:52 a.m., striking the bear in the hindquarters and delivering a carefully calculated dose of sedative medication, designed to incapacitate the animal without causing additional harm. The dart's effectiveness would depend on the bear's current condition, body weight, and stress levels, with full incapacitation expected within 5 to 10 minutes under normal circumstances. However, the animal's injuries and elevated adrenaline levels created variables that made the timeline uncertain. Additional emergency medical personnel entered the vehicle bay at 6:49:15 a.m., including 2 paramedic teams and a trauma surgeon who had been helicoptered in from Bozeman Deaconess Hospital. Their arrival provided the advanced life support capabilities that would be crucial for saving the lives of the injured officers, particularly Officer Nguyen, whose condition was deteriorating rapidly due to internal bleeding and possible damage to vital organs. The medical response to the 3 injured officers required careful coordination to ensure that the most critically injured received priority attention while also providing appropriate care for all victims. Officer Nguyen was immediately identified as the most critical case, with trauma indicators suggesting life-threatening injuries that required immediate surgical intervention to have any chance of survival. Officer Hill was unconscious but appeared to have sustained primarily external injuries, while Officer Willis was conscious and able to communicate, indicating less severe trauma. The bear showed signs of sedation beginning at 6:50:23 a.m., with decreased movement and apparent difficulty maintaining coordination and balance. However, the animal remained potentially dangerous due to its size and instinctive responses, requiring continued caution from all personnel in the vehicle bay. A second tranquilizer dart was administered at 6:45 a.m. to ensure complete incapacitation and allow safe medical evacuation of the human victims. Officer Nguyen was evacuated from the vehicle bay at 6:52:18 a.m., loaded onto a helicopter ambulance that had landed in the parking lot adjacent to the police station. Her condition during transport was critical, with paramedics working continuously to maintain blood pressure and breathing, while the helicopter rushed toward the trauma center at Bozeman Deaconess Hospital. The flight time of 8 minutes would prove crucial in determining whether surgical intervention could be initiated quickly enough to address her internal injuries. Officer Hill was evacuated by ground ambulance at 6:53:42 a.m., with paramedics having stabilized his condition sufficiently for surface transport to the hospital. His injuries, while severe, appeared less immediately life-threatening than those sustained by Officer Nguyen, allowing for more deliberate treatment and evaluation during the transport process. His unconscious state was concerning, but could be attributed to either head trauma or shock, rather than necessarily indicating fatal injuries. Officer Willis was able to walk to the ambulance with assistance, demonstrating that his injuries, while painful and significant, had not incapacitated him to the same degree as his colleagues. His coherent communication and ability to provide information about the encounter were valuable for both medical treatment and the preliminary investigation that was already beginning. His evacuation at 6:55:12 a.m. marked the end of the immediate rescue phase of the emergency response. The bear was confirmed to be fully sedated at 6:56:30 a.m., allowing wildlife officers to approach safely and begin assessment of the animal's condition and injuries. The bear had sustained 8 gunshot wounds, several of which had caused significant tissue damage and blood loss, though none appeared to have struck vital organs directly. The decision about whether the animal could survive its injuries and be relocated or would require euthanasia was deferred, pending a more thorough veterinary examination. The vehicle bay was secured as a crime scene at 7:02 a.m., with investigators beginning the process of documenting physical evidence, collecting security camera footage, and preserving the scene for detailed forensic analysis. The investigation would be conducted jointly by the Bozeman Police Department, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, and potentially federal agencies, depending on the outcome of the officer's injuries and the circumstances surrounding the bear's presence in the urban area. Initial medical reports from Bozeman Deaconess Hospital indicated that Officer Nguyen had been taken directly to surgery for treatment of massive internal bleeding caused by penetrating chest wounds inflicted by the bear's claws. The surgical team, led by Dr. Patricia Morrison, worked for 4 hours to repair damage to her lungs, liver, and several major blood vessels, but the extent of the trauma ultimately proved too severe for medical intervention to overcome. Officer Teresa Nguyen was pronounced dead at 11:23 a.m. on April 22, 2024, becoming the first law enforcement officer in Montana history to be killed in the line of duty by a bear attack. Her death sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community and highlighted the unique dangers faced by officers working in areas where urban development intersected with wildlife habitat. The Vietnamese American community in Bozeman was devastated by the loss, organizing vigils and memorial services that drew hundreds of participants.